coming. I hope it's late enough in the morning where we didn't have any trouble. Right?
I normally get up. I want you to know that.
Hey, I'm
Retirement.
Anyway, we're going to have design standards and signs, no particular order.
Start with signs.
Start with signs. If we could do a voice roll call, and Deanna, if you would start with us.
Certainly.
Riley Hoagland, Mitch Parsons,
Diane Coots.
Lindsay Zamel.
Lenny Nelson.
Judy Casper.
Steve Griffiths,
Kevin Curlin.
Miles Schlesinger,
Jeff Wynn.
Anne Marie Skinner.
Ron Chandler.
Dick Anderson.
Kathy Steer, City Reporter.
Great. All right. Ron,
Ready?
oh. So if I can, just a reminder though, since it is a work session, we're not making any decisions, but the idea is to just dig deeper into the topics. And again, from our last work session, we got a nice glimpse of a lot of these, and we'll keep digging.
Josh, we'll need to have you pull up the seat.
I'm leaving the party. Well, we're right on time. Maybe 2 minutes late, yeah.
We can look.
Okay.
I still have a big contact.
All right, we'll get it.
So, welcome. It's nice to have you all here as we continue our discussions on the proposed sign ordinance and the proposed design standards ordinance. Before we start, reminder to everybody, there's goodies over there. That's to keep your blood sugar up and everything flowing so that for the next few hours as we go through this. I also have one announcement since it's rare that we have both the City Council and the Planning Commission here. Lindsay Zamel, our Planning Director, has submitted her resignation.
What?
She is headed back to Washington. And she and I have kind of talked about this for the last little while, so we've known it's been coming. So without really telling anybody other than Lindsay, we've had a transition plan that we've been working with, and I'm really pleased to announce that we have appointed Anne Marie Skinner to be our new planning director. So very much thank you to Lindsay. She's done a bang-up job, and good luck to Anne Marie.
She's got my hair.
Okay. All right. So I've passed out to you the copy of the signed ordinance. Josh, there should be an extra one floating around here somewhere. There's two things that are different on this. One is that if you recall in your last packet, it had notes that said, talk to Ron about this or talk to Richard about that. I got rid of those. But I also highlighted some of the topics that we really need to discuss. Our intent today is really to try to get a sense of direction from you as to whether or not we are on the right track or whether or not we need to make changes or scrap the whole thing and start over. There is one really big question that we really need a sense of direction from you, because this ordinance is based upon your answer to that question, or how we proceed is based on that. And that is, does the city want to take over the sidewalks from the outside of the curb to back? Take those over from ODOT. We have experience in this in Taft. We do have control of the sidewalks, which gives us a lot more flexibility. In essence, the problem that it creates is, if you look up on the screen, there is no such thing as a straight line right-of-way. This is pretty typical, where your right-of-way begins here on this lot, and your right-of-way begins here on this lot. Okay? That creates an awful lot of difficulty, and this is sidewalk. that creates an awful lot of difficulties in trying to decide where you can put sidewalks, signs, unless you simply say you can't put it in the right-of-way. But even that creates problems, because what's the right-of-way? This is obviously within the right-of-way. Is that within the right-of-way? In the ordinance, we have tried to define that differently so that it gives us a little bit more options. So that's the really big question, the biggest question that's before you, and is really before the city council, is are you willing to do that? I discussed this with the ODOT officials. They are willing to do that. Like I said, they've already done it in Taft. There were a couple of things that we have discussed. ODOT is under a court judgment for its Americans with Disability Act substandard ramps. We would not want to assume the liabilities of that court judgment, and they are agreeable to that. They basically, the agreement would say something along the lines of the state would maintain liability for that court judgment until such time, and that portion of it, until such time as they actually make the repairs. Once the repairs are made and meet the court's judgment, then that portion of it would become, once again, ours. The other part of it is in dealing with extensions or constructions. We always want to maintain the opportunity to work with ODOT for new sidewalks. We want to try to keep that. They seem to be amenable to that idea. However, this budget's a very good example. There are times when we have simply said we're going to do it, and we're extending some sidewalks now, and we're paying for the total cost of it. So we want to try to maintain that flexibility, and they seem to be okay with that concept as well. So I think we have the basis. We'll then eventually, if the city is interested in going forward with this, we'll then turn that over to our attorneys and say, work it all out, and they'll do their thing, and we'll be able to move forward. Now, I might note that there's one difference that we've also talked about with ODOT pertaining to the agreement with Taft. Under the Taft agreement, the city's control begins.
Musical chairs.
Lieutenant, can we ask you to take a seat, Sergeant, can we ask you to take a seat in the audience, or just slide over?
Yeah, what's your slide?
Anyways, and in that agreement, the city's actually begins 1 foot behind the curb. We want it from the beginning of the curb, so that we have the curb and the sidewalk. And again, the ODOT officials seem to be okay with that concept. So this ordinance is really based on the idea that the city does have control of the sidewalk, curb gutter, or curb and sidewalk. So I just kind of want to open that up to a discussion to get your feeling on that.
Is it possible, rather than using right-of-way, to define the area differently?
We have in this ordinance, and that's why I say it's important for us to, we use the term travel way, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. We use the term travel way that has a definition as to what that is. And like I said, we'll get to that in just a minute. And that seems to solve this problem that you see up on the screen.
Ron, has there been any issues with the Taft area with that
No,
agreement? And that's been in place since urban renewal improvements?
it has. That came into place when we did the center median, and it's been in place ever since then. One of the questions that we discussed was, what about maintenance? Well, our ordinance already provides for that the maintenance is responsible is the responsibility of the property owner to the quarters. So,
Would the concept of travel way be consistent throughout the city or just on 101?
no, this would apply throughout the city.
Interesting you should mention that. I was in Burlington, Vermont, and they had their downtown, it's about the same size as Lincoln City, and they had an area downtown with big signs that said, "The city owns the 9-foot sidewalk right away." And they had, because I took special note of the handicapped accessibility, and with that 9 feet, it was really convenient to travel. But they had signs that were posted, and I believe that was the only area, was the downtown. Of course, our downtown is 7 feet long. And it did prevail for more fluid traffic, and then they could close off certain areas and have certain venues at their discretion. I thought it was pretty slick.
I found the same thing last week when I was attending a convention in Nashville. I visited the community of Franklin, gorgeous downtown, just beautifully done. But its right-of-way was also a state road. And I asked him, how were you able to do this? Because there were a lot of things that would prohibit it. And they said, well, the first thing is that, in their case, TDOT had to give them the control of the right-of-way so that they could adapt their ordinances to it. Okay, so ultimately this ordinance really is dependent upon that decision being made and that we do take control of that. If we don't, then this ordinance will be changed significantly. It won't be a lot different than what we already have, which is simply nothing goes in the right of way.
So that would reflect our decisions on signs and design as well?
It does.
So that's something we have to keep in mind. Should we do an ordinance as we work through this?
Yes. To a lesser extent, design. The greatest extent is in the sign ordinance.
Okay.
All right. So let's go through and just, I'm going to lead you through on just identifying where in the packet we're going to be discussing. The first one, if you go to packet page 8, this is actually a discussion of the term travelway instead of right-of-way. If you look at the second highlighted area, travelway is defined as an area that is for the use of the general public for driving, walking, maneuvering, bicycling, or other means of travel. Yes, sir.
If this applies throughout the city, then there's a major compliance issue with that, because there are a lot of areas, a lot of city streets that are certainly not travelways. They're blocked by planters or bushes or all kinds of things.
Okay.
Would adding unobstructed, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, they're riprap put down so people can't park in front of homes, or, planters put down so people can't plant in front of homes. There's a major compliance issue with that throughout the city.
The part that deals with obstruction is going to come later on in the ordinance as you're dealing with what you can and can't do in streetways. Now, there are other issues associated with this that go beyond the signs, which is what Commissioner Griffiths was talking about, and that's what can you put into a right-of-way or a travelway. In this case, the travelway is specifically defined for the sign ordinance. A good point is that we may want to look at our other ordinances to see if that is something that should apply as well.
So, originally, I think we're thinking about just along the highway, but now this is expanded. I mean, just a few things that Steve was saying makes this much a different animal. I mean, it just.
Well, the sign ordinance applies to the whole city, no matter where you are within the city. And this definition of travelway defines what defines the sign ordinance. That's why I said we may need to look at other parts of of our city code to determine if we're going to apply this elsewhere with changes. But this definition is for the sign ordinance itself. Okay, if you go to packet page 11, two things that I want to note. This is in the placement of signs. Item number B, which is your first highlighted portion, says all portions and components, signs, and sign structures must be placed such that no portion or component obstructs clear and unhindered passage of any vehicular, bicycle, or pedestrian traffic in the travelway. And then D is no portion or component shall be placed or displayed in a manner that presents a safety hazard to pedestrians, bicyclists, vehicles, and drivers, or anyone else in the travelway. Now, the real difference between our existing ordinance and this is that our existing ordinance says you can't put it in the right-of-way. Okay? This one says, essentially, you can, as long as it's not obstructing the different types of traffic that are happening in the travelway.
I actually don't agree at all. I think state law prohibits you from placing anything in the state right of way. And that's a state statute. And so I don't understand how you can avoid a state statute by creating a new definition.
I believe that, if I may, I think that the first thing that Mr. Chandler brought up today was we have the opportunity to take over the sidewalk back to, and the state is willing to.
Change state law.
According to ODOT, it does. It no longer is right-of-way.
They can't hear you, Richard. It's not on record when you're over there. Sorry. We have to get it to the table.
But I don't, I do. The core is that you have someone who's decided that they're going to go out and place flags in the right of way. And we don't want to give that person a citation because it's a U.S. flag. It doesn't matter because you can't regulate the content. So they could be Nazi flags or any kind of flag. You can't look at what it is. So what's the best way to avoid looking at content? Just prohibit it. That's what it is now. No signs in the right of way. That's content control. But if you take on the state's regulatory program and say, let's say you are going to take on and allow people to issue permits or let people put things in the sign or create exemptions or to let people put things in the right of way, you're still going to have to be content neutral. So you might as well just imagine that the flags that will be out there will be Nazi flags, or whatever most offensive flag you can think of will be what's in the right of way. So I think this is, this whole direction is contrary to law. I just think it's a bad idea. I don't pursue it. It's an incredible waste of time.
Okay, we happen to have a big disagreement on that one. And let me give you another example. This is Southeast 32nd, okay? Your right-of-way begins at this line, okay? Now, first of all, let me also explain that in all the discussions I've had with ODOT, they have told me just the contrary of what Richard has said, that by an agreement, which we already have in Taft, that is no longer considered right-of-way. Their right-of-way stops 1 foot back from the curb, and that is where their right-of-way ends, and the city's ordinances take over. Okay, but here's the other question. We allow flags under this ordinance. We allow feather banners. We allow A-frames under this. Okay, under our existing ordinance and the state, nothing can be placed from here on the sidewalk or the planting strip, okay? Why not allow a flag or a feather banner to be placed in the grassy park strip? It's not obstructing traffic, it's not harming any pedestrian traffic, it's not harming any vehicular traffic, it's not harming any bicycle traffic, it's certainly not harming any wheelchair traffic. The businesses believe it is a good thing to have that in front of their businesses in order to advertise. They certainly think it's a good thing to have the American flag to be flown there on special occasions. So the question I have for you is, why not allow those types of signs in a park strip?
Well, is the park strip on landscaping? I mean, to me, if you've got landscaping along there, it should be landscaping, not flags and banners. It shouldn't be piles of fertilizer for sale by the store. There's a reason that the code puts landscaping strips and vegetative areas around the city, and to turn those then into, well, why not just cover it all up with
Well,
flags
this is
and
going to
banners?
become your central question, and that's why I'm asking you, do you want to take over the site, or do you want to take over this part of the right-of-way? If you look at this piece of property here, okay, they could probably get a feather banner here, okay? If you go to that other picture that I had, there's nowhere where this place can put up a flag, a banner, or anything else. Can't put it on it. There's no way to do it. That's the problem that we find, is that there's such an inconsistency within what is the right-of-way that some businesses would be able to, some businesses would not be able to. So there's a couple ways of dealing with that. You can simply say, nothing goes in the right-of-way. Follow the state law, follow our existing law. In that case, then I will ask the question, can they put it out on that sidewalk? Because that is, on this sidewalk, because that is not right-of-way. I'm sorry, this sidewalk is not right-of-way. This sidewalk is right-of-way. Who, if they put a sign here, who's breaking the law? That's the problem that I find with saying we're going to use the term right-of-way. Counselor?
Well, I was thinking about TAP. You said there's sort of a TAP agreement now, and I can only think of one example is on the corner where there's glass floats, there's a thrift store, and those floats are out extended pretty far, and I believe somebody said it was okay. But on windy day and walking and traffic, those things wobble and wiggle and are prone to being collapsing. So that, looking at that, that would be okay. So if that were okay along the whole strip, that's what we would be looking at?
Well, let's do
that?
We're going to be jumping into, in just a minute, maintenance, types of structures, and things that can go in.
And who would monitor it?
That would be our code enforcement.
We'd have to hire a few hundred more.
So, if this applies throughout the city, the concept of travel way, wouldn't that lead to a proliferation of signs? Like, I could put one outside.
No, because this ordinance also defines what signs are permitted within different zones. That's the other part of it. You have a zoning ordinance that says, and this includes, you can put this type of sign in this zone, but not in that zone. Yes, sir.
I think we're challenged that we don't have a consistent sidewalk space either, or a travel way, and some businesses don't have that opportunity of a sidewalk or the corner of 51st and Highway 101 where there isn't a lot of foot traffic, and so now we're trying to apply something in our head, like, you have a downtown, pick a smaller town, Albany or whatever it is, and they have that downtown front, and there's sidewalks on both sides, and it's consistent, and there's It doesn't exist here, and so now we're trying to put things in place where there's some places don't even have that. So like, just like here, you know?
Well, you already have that to a degree,
Yeah.
because right now people can place signs outside the right-of-way. Some of those places, they may have an area where they can, with sidewalk. Other places don't have sidewalk, and they put it back. Good example of that is out in front of Captain Cook's. There's a sidewalk in front of Captain Cook's, but they put up their feather banners, their flags, their signs just inside of where the right-of-way ends. And that's where they're able to do that. Problem is that you have other places where they can't do that because the right-of-way goes right to their doorstep. Good example of that is Christmas Cottage. The right-of-way goes right up to their doorstep.
The Nelscott, the little place, road inside Nelscott Strip belongs to ODOT.
It does. It's part of the right-of-way. Okay, let's go through the other parts of this, and that'll maybe answer some of the questions, also bring up a few other questions. The next thing I wanted to talk about were feather banners and flags. If you go to packet page 4, you'll find that a feather banner is defined as, I'm in the second highlighted area going down, means a portable sign of cloth, bunting, plastic, paper, or similar non-rigid, flexible material taller than it is wide and attached to a pole. A feather banner is not a flag or a banner. Flag means a portable sign of fabric, bunting, or similar material with no framework or structure that is displayed hanging from a staff, halyard, or flag-mounted fixture on a building so as to allow movement caused by the atmosphere and is wider than it is tall, but no more than 3 times as wide as any other dimension. A flag is not a banner or a feather banner. Now, if you will then now turn to packet page 7, another definition I wanted you to look at is a portable sign, which is defined as a sign that is not a temporary sign, is transported in and out of a building or a structure on a daily basis, and is not affixed to a building, structure, or the ground in a permanent manner. Portable signs are A-frame signs, sandwich board signs, sidewalk signs, or flags. And then if you'll turn the page to back at page 8, one more thing to look at, and that gets us all through the definitions, and that is temporary sign. Means a sign which is displayed consistently, but only for a limited and defined period of time and is not permanently affixed or attached to a building, structure, or the ground, and is designated to be easily removed at the end of the limited and defined period of time. Temporary signs are lawn signs and sidewalk signs. Pole signs can also be designed and utilized as temporary signs. Okay. That, with those any questions on those definitions before I jump to the placement? Yes.
Why isn't a feather banner defined as a portable sign?
Because I neglected to put that in there, and it should be in
So
there.
that should be in there?
Yeah, feather banner should be included as portable.
And there's a conflict between temporary sign, the last sentence says that pole signs can also be designed and utilized, but the definition of a pole sign says permanent freestanding, so that'll need to be corrected.
Thank you. If you go to then packet page 16. This is the portable sign limitation. These are the two items, A and, well, A is the one that I really wanted to emphasize. This is the regulation of the numbers. So think again, you got two definitions of what where they can be placed. You've got right-of-way, you've got travel-way, okay? The following are portable sign allowances per legally occupied tenant spaces in any zone. 2 flags and one of either an A-frame, a sandwich board sign, a feather banner, or a sidewalk sign. Under the case of a right-of-way, it can't be placed in a right-of-way. Under the case of a travel-way, it could be placed in the travel-way, as long as it does not obstruct traffic.
I still think that's too many.
That was kind of where we wanted to go with the question.
I have a question. So when we went over the sign survey and all the responses that were gotten, one thing that I noticed is that pretty universally, nobody has an issue with the A-frame or sandwich board signs. Yet currently, they're very, very limited in our sign code. And even with what we're looking at here, you have to choose between that or a banner, which to me, in my perspective, are such different signs. You can't write whatever you want on a banner. If I want to do a dinner special and put that on a sandwich board, now I can't have a feather banner that says open. So to me, like choosing one or the other, that doesn't necessarily make sense while still having 2 flags. Because I think the flags can add a lot of bulk and whatnot. It just seems kind of strange that you have to choose between those 4 and you get 2 flags. So like currently, I don't know if anyone's noticed what I have outside my business right now, but I got rid of my feather banner. And I have a pole, a Gomberg, nice pole, and 2 flags flying from it. But I also have an LED solar-powered light, which is banned in this code because here under D on the next page, temporary and portable signs shall not be illuminated, either directly or indirectly. Yet this time of year, 90% of the time my business is open, it's dark outside. It gets dark at 6:30, and I don't open until 4. So no one sees that, and the light makes a huge difference. Pretty sure I'm the only one in town that uses that. So I don't know, like you can't light up a feather banner. You just can't do it. You can't put anything on a sign. But, so I don't know if that was kind of thought about of the different ways people might implement this. So.
I had a similar concern. I didn't understand why we might allow, say, 2 flags and 1 feather banner. But if someone doesn't want to have flags, why couldn't they have 3, replace the flags with feather banners?
The numbers, just by way of background, the numbers and the options are just put in there as talking points for this very purpose.
I would suggest 2 of anything. Take your pick, but it's not necessarily 2 flags, but that would limit everything, because this allows you 3 of anything. But from a business owner perspective, I could pick 2 of those. I could pick to either have a flag and an A-frame, or an A-frame and a feather banner, or 2 feather banners and no A-frame or flags. But 2 would limit the numbers more, so when you get those strips where you've got 10 tenants in a row, that you're not getting 30 different temporary signs out there, hypothetically, like you mentioned.
So you're saying 2 of anything?
Of any of the ones listed,
Of 2,
flags,
okay.
A-frame, sandwich board,
2
feather banner,
portable
sidewalk
signs.
sign, but you can
Okay.
get 2 portable signs. I mean, it makes a little more sense to me. Allows a little more flexibility for each unique business to pick what works for them.
Is that kind of what you were thinking about?
Yeah, if someone wants to have a A-frame and a feather banner and no flags, that seems to fit the spirit of what we're doing here.
My concern about A-frames is that people who are responsible probably put them up close to the building. But if you put them further out the sidewalk, we begin to impede the travel of people who have disabilities. And it's bad enough around here for people who are in wheelchairs, but adding lots of A-frames seems to me to make it much more difficult, can make it much more difficult for people to travel.
Are you talking then about a problem with having A-frames? Or are you talking about the enforcement of where they're placed?
I didn't know we could.
You can leave it.
Because under this ordinance, you cannot obstruct traffic, vehicular, bicycle, pedestrian traffic. So is the problem with the A-frame itself as a sign, Or is the problem with where the people are placing it and we're not enforcing it?
Who does the measurement?
That would be these guys in blue.
Code enforcement. More specifically.
More specifically.
The guys in blue, frankly, will just get rid of code enforcement.
That's community outreach.
I guess I generally have a problem with A-frame because of the fact that our sidewalks here are so funky. I mean, some of them are only a few feet wide. I really disagree with what we did in the area down by the D Sands where we put in a nice sidewalk and put a telephone pole right in the middle of it so that anybody who's wheelchair bound is going to find that difficult.
So would that be the same case as a flag, a feather banner, or any other type of portable sign?
I don't have so much trouble with a feather banner, although frankly, I'm not sure how you stabilize a feather banner.
There's holes in the sidewalk, and you.
Oh, where the flag is supposed to go. Oh, okay.
So Letty, you really are talking about enforcement of things that are in the.
Well, if you think we can enforce it so that we leave the 32 inches, 36 inches required for under ADA for passing of.
There's varying opinions on that.
4 to 5 feet.
Or, yeah. It's up to the
ADA
public
code
order.
works.
Yeah, city engineer can make an exception.
Okay. I guess the enforcement, I guess I could live with A-frames if we were going to enforce it. I somehow find that difficult to
Well,
believe that's going to
there's the other
happen.
side of the coin with A-frames, where if you don't allow them in the sidewalk at all, then what you get is businesses blocking their exiting, so you get a safety issue. Because people are blocking half their doorway with an A-frame, and in the event of an emergency, which no one ever expects, now your exiting is hindered. So I think it'd be safer to have it out on the opposite side of the sidewalk, so people walking by can read it, as long as you've got that ADA space, which would be the same thing for any portable signs or tables or benches or anything that anyone wants to put on the sidewalk. You're not going to be able to block the whole sidewalk.
Well, I guess I can agree with that principle.
Steve?
Have we thought of a substitute for feather banners? If I'm driving down 101, it's really hard for me to tell what types of stores are on either side of the street because their signs are all facing the street. They're not facing drivers who are driving down or up the street. And I was wondering, say, instead of a feather banner, in the poles where you put the feather banners, you're allowed to put a permanent vertical sign up there that indicates restaurant or dinosaur shop or pizza parlor, whatever. So you're driving on this, because if I'm a driver, I can't see the A signs, they're too low.
Mm-hmm.
And that, if it's up high enough, it's not going to blow in anybody's face. The dimensions could be limited, so it's not going to obscure the view or what's beyond it. But I think it might work. It'd be a service to people who are driving through town.
And those would be, those are allowed under permanent signage, provided we remedy the situation with allowing signage in the right-of-way. So this discussion specifically is on portable signage. So what you're suggesting is allowed if the businesses choose to do that
But
and
if
obtain
it's allowed,
a
if it's
permit.
utilized, then you can get rid of some of the portable signage because
Mhm.
you're going to have something there.
Right now, under the current code, you would not be able to do that because they would be in the right-of-way
You can't
and
project
ODOT
into the
doesn't, so we
right-of-way.
can't issue a permit for that.
So one of the pictures, and I've seen it other places, let's just say part of a marketing aspect of Explore Lincoln City with the city, as you have these signs that each block, both this way and each way, says, in this block, you will find this, this, and that. So as it's uniform throughout the whole city, we can put the little slide-in placards in that says, pizza, in this space, both sides, as that goes down and then it's uniform, and then, if there's other things, flags or whatever, just so that there's a freer sidewalk, but also universal, the first placard's free on us, or whatever, something like that. That way it's, because I think you did a shopping center picture that had a similar kind of, in this area you will find.
Like all the way finding signs pointing in different directions.
Right.
So Let me make sure I understand this. If you're talking about wayfinding signs, which are wonderful things to have, then that would mean you would not be doing flags, feather banners, and A-frames?
On the sidewalk, take that out completely. Let the city be responsible for this kind of marketing, wayfinding, let's make the space free and accessible to drivers coming in and out. They can look up and say, well, in this block, we'll have this, or this section, we'll have this, and as you move down. And yeah, they'll take an initial investment of implementation, but, yeah.
I'd just like to add to that, when I'm driving around I'm looking at different small towns that are about the same size as ours. The ones that are easiest to find the business and what it is have the wayfinding signs, and they have signs that are perpendicular on the building in front of the, like you were saying,
Sure.
Diane and I have been talking, blade signs, she calls them, that might be the technical term for it. But just when you're driving by, then you can see eatery, or you can see souvenirs, or you can see whatever is being sold at that business. So then you've got both indicators that there are businesses and they are open. But you don't have all this clutter and diversion when you're trying to drive.
Let me point out one other thing again that is key in this, and that is the perpendicular sign is not permitted under current ordinances because it goes into the right of way.
So we are looking at changing our ordinances. I'm saying that if we're trying to declutter the city and make the businesses prosper, especially at a time when businesses are having a hard time, we ought to be doing everything we can to make it easy for tourists and me, someone who lives here, to be able to find the business that I'm looking for.
And a perpendicular or blade sign frees up the sidewalk.
Yes.
And as I'm driving through, I can read it versus their sign that's up against the wall. As I'm driving through, I can see there's Marcy's, oh, great, okay. And wayfinding definitely identifies there's food, there's shops, etc. So it's two different things. And to help with the blade signs is that create some, let them keep, like if they're all the same size, even a same look, but allow them to have their own logos, their own, the way they put their names, the fonts, etc., but be consistent.
Yes. And maybe each pearl could have a different background color.
Correct.
Like Nell Scott, it's like a kite, or Delake, it's the skateboard, or something, like a base of that. But it's to show that, like, hey, look, we're trying, we want you to promote businesses, we want you to succeed, and we're not trying to take anything away from you. Really, we're not, and I think that's kind of maybe an aspect of the business owners, is that we're removing their ability to profit, to do well, and trying to find that middle ground. Like, hey, here's what we can do with you.
Well, I think when you're driving down 101 too, and you have a sidewalk or sandwich board, the cars block it.
Yeah,
because when you're going by, you can't see what's on there. It's all blocked. But if it's above and I'm driving, then I can see it.
It could be really cute to have wayfinding signs.
I think so, and I think even like, especially our walking districts, when you're, like, I'm thinking standing at an intersection, like if you're in Ocean Lake and you're standing at 15th Street, if you're at that intersection and there's actually a wayfinding sign that tells you this is across the street, this is up here, anyone who's from town, they might not know that there's a bookstore 4 blocks that way, but if it's on a wayfinding sign right there, they're gonna walk 4 blocks to go into a bookstore. And it's those stores that are just a little bit outside of where people already walk. If they knew what was 1 block away, that's really gonna help those businesses, and it's gonna encourage more traffic flow.
I think it would help with the parking too.
Yeah.
Because then I could park at the public parking knowing that I just walk 2 blocks and there's a bookstore versus driving around and around trying to find something.
So let me ask 2 questions, and then I know Council Pastor has a comment, but let me ask 2 questions associated with this. So what I'm hearing is no flags, no feather banners, no A-frames within the travel way.
Right. Yes.
Okay. So no Kiwanis flags unless it's off the travel way.
Right.
Okay.
But they can do Kiwanis hanging from the building as well.
Well, let me come back to the other part of it. That's the first part, not within the travel way.
Right. From the building.
What about flags, A-frames, and feather banners that are outside of the right-of-way or the travel way? So in other words, I have no sidewalk, it's just a straight frontage, it's just asphalt and then dirt. Once I get past what the travel way is, or the right-of-way, whichever definition you want to use, then I can put up feather banners, flags, and A-frames.
No, because then you're just.
Then
It's
it's
the
opposite unbalanced again.
So then what I'm hearing then is what you're saying is no feather banners, no flags, unless they're attached to a building and 8 feet high, and no A-frames, period. Is that what I'm hearing?
With the condition of there's going to be another
There'll be
way in
another-
which
yeah.
that there's going to be businesses, regular intervals of these businesses are this way, and we will have you promoted to a satisfactory extent as they are feeling already. If they feel that that is a big enough, this placard or whatever it ends up being.
So I'm gonna keep adding, each time you say something, I'm gonna add something else because of things we have heard from the different property owners. So no flags, even on a 25-foot flagpole off the property side? Or outside of the travelway or right-of-way, somebody has a flag on a 25-foot pole?
Like the auto dealership, they have.
No, I'm talking about just big
They have
25-foot.
There's that huge one in front of the motel,
You'd have to
one
look.
next to the Deer River.
So we don't make, this ordinance does not make a distinction about height of flags. So what I'm hearing you saying then is no flags.
Because we have to identify an American flag as a flag,
No,
just
we
not
cannot do
say
that.
American flag.
So if you
it's
say
gotta be
no
a flag.
flags, that means
No
no
flags.
flags hanging
Not saying
outside
no
of City
flags.
Hall.
Not saying no flags.
So yeah.
Okay, well, then let me come back.
Placement and
Okay,
height.
then if you're saying that, then you
Placement
can
and
have
height.
flags outside the travel way or right of way.
A flagpole, typically you'll see a state, a national, and maybe even a third group together. Flagpoles and flags do not need to be part of the sign ordinance to allow them on private property. So that is something else that could be
Well, no, wait a minute
considered.
though, wait a minute though, no. I'm out of the right of way. Okay? If you say, I don't want A-frames, I don't want feather banners, I don't want flags, because of what they look like in advertising, that means, unless we find another definition, that means no flags. That means no flags on 25-foot poles, that means no Kiwanis flags, that means no flags, unless we come up with a different definition. So what I'm trying to do is push you, how far do you really want to take this? Because there are unintended consequences to the decisions that we're making.
So why can't you allow flags, American flags,
Because it's content neutral.
You can't define content.
Open signs.
So why can't you say flags attached to the building, but not hanging lower than the 8 feet height or whatever that, for the other side?
You can have a flag if it's attached to your building. You can have a flag if it's on a flagpole. Flags are not the same as.
travel.
What's a flagpole?
How many?
What is the flagpole?
Technically, what's in front of my business that I put my custom Marcy's flag on would be a flagpole.
Well-
So I could put any flag I want on top of that.
The building code
Flag.
does regulate the flagpoles and the ability for them to actually structurally be sound in wind loads. So what you have would not actually meet building code
Right,
for a
because it's
structural
a temporary
flagpole.
thing, but it's, because it's, like, technically as far as this is concerned, for a temporary sign, being straight and what's on it, that is considered a flag.
In the public right of way.
Right.
And currently, the Kiwanis is currently violating Oregon law.
Not necessarily.
Well,
Not
I mean,
necessarily. No, they're not.
far from doing
If they are putting their flags in the right of way, yes. If they're putting their flags on private property, no.
Okay?
So what I've heard you guys saying is,
Yes, they are breaking the law. Half the time breaking the law instead of breaking the law. They are breaking the law in many parts of town.
but what I'm hearing you guys saying is that you don't want flags even on the private property.
It's not,
Oh, no,
that's not at all what I just
that's not what.
On private property.
I think you're
hearing.
We're talking about the right
We don't want it in the
So-
travel way or right away,
travel way.
is what I'm.
Okay, so I'm gonna come back to the same question. You guys all know in our streets, we have areas where there's no sidewalk, the building's back, okay? As soon as I get past the travel way or right of way, can I put up a flag? Can I put up a feather banner? Can I put up an A-frame?
No.
That's why I
And no
said
flag.
attached to a building.
Okay, okay.
Or a flagpole consistent with
Right, if you-
code requirements.
flags would
for
be
a
allowed.
flagpole.
So one
Attached
flag.
to-
One flag, but
If
not
they're
one
attached
or
to
two.
attached to the
Yeah.
building or flagpole. I
One,
wouldn't limit it
two.
to just one. I mean, you could say 2 to the house or 1 on a pole and 1 on the
No,
building.
just keep it consistent.
Yeah.
Let's quit trying to make this complicated.
This is making what.
Okay, but that's right. Let me push it
And my
again.
only
If you
concern
say,
with one is, then you've got
you got
a state flag and American flag, and now you've got to choose.
or you put them both on the
Because you can make an
same pole.
exception for government buildings. Can you not make an exception and say that, for example, in front of City Hall, you can fly the American flag and you can fly the American flag?
Civic buildings could,
Right.
yeah.
No, even in government, you can't do the content.
Okay, but you can allow two
say,
yeah, but the
poles,
government-
and if you want to fly the American flag, you can.
Well, then we're, so,
Because the fire department.
okay, so I'm gonna use again another business. Captain Cook has 3
The civic
flagpoles,
building shouldn't have.
3 tall ones.
They're,
In this case, they would be limited to 1,
Yes.
2, or 3.
One.
One.
well, you can put multiple flags on one pole.
Hey, you're
So
complicated.
flagpoles, okay.
I'm totally serious.
Private property.
Structurally,
Yeah, what's that?
You know,
So once I drive
like
into my private
Riley's
property,
suggestion
can't
about.
Here, let's, one conversation, one, okay.
I like Riley's suggestion about the wayfinding signs to assist and to partner with the businesses to address their issues. If I project forward in reading this sign regulation as it's written, to what downtown could look like with 2 flags for each tenant, a banner, a this, a that, it's going to become so that you don't see any of it. Because it's too much, it's overload, it's too much. And if we can do something to clean that up, make it easier for people to find the businesses, which is, I think is what the businesses want, make it easier for the businesses to identify when they're open, which I think is also what we heard quite a bit in their comments, and yet get rid of the clutter. And then if we could actually enforce the ordinances that we already have on the books, that would go a long way.
let me come back to one other thing again, because I know this question will come up, okay? And so what I'm trying to do is that whatever you decide on, we have anticipated as many consequences of our decisions as we possibly can. I have a business, okay? I have a flag on my building. Kiwanis comes in and says, I'd like to do a fundraiser and put up an American flag. I would be forced to tell them no, because I already have met my one limit on flag.
Yes.
I would say that would be an independent decision. I mean,
Say you can
me as a
let
business
them
owner, if they
flag.
come in, okay, I'll take down my flag for a day and put an American flag out there. That's no problem. But if someone else feels it's that crucial that they don't have their own flag, I mean, but being allowed to even just have one, well, that shows someone's here, someone put this out, and someone hasn't brought it back inside yet.
And when it's all taken away and you have this one flag out, it's going to stand out. So that's the other thing about this. If that's all clean, if there are no signs, there's no banners, there's no sandwich boards, and you have one flag and wayfinding signs, it's gonna look cleaner. And that will be what catches your eye.
If I can, looking around the room, I see one business in this room, Marcy. I find it, when I have conversations with businesses, I'm usually criticizing them because I haven't met a business yet that doesn't like a lot of signs. And they always argue up and down for more. And as Steve pointed out, it becomes one-upmanship. But I would caution you again on what you're saying. You sound like non-business people. And you're worried about litter, you're worried about congestion. And I'm a little concerned that I'm not hearing from business. I'm not taking a side. I'm just making an observation of how quickly, you have the answer for something you're not even invested in.
But I think we're talking about this in two different ways. One, about what you're saying is too much, but we're also offering an alternative, is we want greater clarity on where services and stores are. And so I think it might be a good idea for the city to find somebody who can provide us with very good examples of wayfinding signs and how they can be used to promote local businesses, especially for people who are traveling up and down 101. And so in any future discussion of the sign issue, the city has examples of, hey, look what this would look like. Here's what Albany does, or here's what Corvallis does with these blade signs, and how attractive and how effective they are in promoting local business.
And you can find those also in cities that are our size. Moab, Utah, Winthrop, Washington, and there's a whole bunch of them that are doing exactly what we've been talking about, and you should be able to recognize.
Judy?
All of this is unique to each pearl. And I think something we need to look at more closely is Nell Scott. Because if you say if the property goes all the way to the doorway, that is ODOT property, I think a lot of this might not work for that little chunk of business. And I think we have to address how can we make it fit that area, because it's unique to the whole strip. It is totally unique. And I think it behooves us if we don't address that uniqueness.
Well, if you have wayfinding signs like in Nell Scott, right now, as you drive by, unless you're familiar with those businesses, you can't really tell what's there. But if there was one wayfinding sign that you could see driving by that had a list of right here, boom, 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 these are all the businesses right here, that would, I think, draw more people in than there being 6 feather banners in the middle part so people can see each.
Because I hear from them as well, we need those banners because we're way over
So
here.
what I was thinking is, like you said, so why don't we go back to the business owners and ask them a new question? Because the reason there was a lot of outrage is because ODOT came through town, handed people a letter saying, we're gonna steal your signs if you put it out again, when people have been doing it forever. So there was shock, there was outrage, there was, don't take my stuff. I need people to see me, this is gonna hurt me hundreds of dollars a day, every single day I don't have this, because there's no alternative yet. But if we went to business owners and said, okay, so what if you can't have your feather banner, but we're gonna give you a sign? We're gonna make you one, and we're gonna put it right here, and it's gonna have your name on it, and it's gonna show people a block away from your business where to find you. I think that you get a different response. I think, for me, I certainly showed up to those meetings as an outraged business owner going, what the hell's going on?
It's gotta be consistent.
Exactly.
So that no one
Consistent.
thinks that someone else is getting something
That
there.
everyone's got the opportunity.
And I think it's important that if we have somebody draw it up, they use our town, not Albany or somebody else. Take an area and say, this is how clean and what it could look like. And this is what we're going for. And exactly that, because then I can visually see what I'm doing. But feather banners, because like you said, one puts it up, then the other puts it out. And it really becomes just mass that you don't see anything. So those 15 that says I'm open, people aren't even seeing because it's screaming signs and I'm just driving.
And then we don't have to violate law of assuming the responsibility for the other part of it too.
Mitch, you had something you
Yeah,
wanted.
I went to the open house that we had at the community college with the businesses. And to your point, what I heard more of was they were wanting more signs so people could find where they were and to get people in. So it was more of more signs people will know I'm here rather than better signs people will know I'm here.
So the other thing is, Ron's tried to make the point. So what you're proposing is you're ready to stand in front of the Kiwanis and tell them there are 8 days a year of lining the city with flags, American flags, is out the window.
Yep.
And their major fundraiser that, supports.
How is
also-
it a fundraiser? How does that?
They charge
They charge
people,
each
businesses pay to.
They can still do that, like Marcy said, take out the one flag that we allow them and to put up their flag, they'll still get money
On a business.
on a business.
Okay, there's a lot of empty space that strings through.
If they're violating state law.
Whether they're violating or not, we're trying to, I'm just, again, putting you as an elected and appointed commissioners, that you guys, you're now gonna prepare. Welcome to the club. You're gonna prepare and answer the question. You no longer like to support veterans and what the flag.
That picture is allowing them to violate law also. That picture is with that. I understand that, but if we're looking to clean up the whole thing, hey, look, yes, we support you, and also you're going to have to do it differently.
But I wonder if some areas of the city, like the Mel Scott Strip, that would be perfectly all right to, on those 8 days, national holidays, line them with American flags. Because
Gotta change that
How are you
statement.
gonna accept that?
You gotta change that
line them
statement.
with flags.
What's to say? Flag out and leave it up to code enforcement to tell them to take down their American flag.
And what's to say that
Bring
they
it all the
can't,
time.
they can't, as a business themselves, ask the city for an exemption
For what?
to do their illegal activity?
8 days.
We could do-
8 days.
I mean,
How long have they been doing this?
Oh, the Lions been doing it, I've been here for almost 30 years.
Forever time.
And the Lions used to do it 30 years ago.
Right. We're not enforcing what we should already, and we're gonna come down on all the other businesses except for that. We do that all over the place, and I'm not about that. I'm not trying to.
So Ryan, when did you stop beating your dogs?
When? I never did.
Oh.
You never stop eating it.
Still to this day, no. But that's the thing, is like, we have to take a stand, and unfortunately, we are the appointed ones, and we are the elected ones, and we do have to make the difficult decisions. And it already comes to me anyway. So to have Kiwanis or whoever threatened to have to come after me is part of what is this. And we do have to make those decisions, and we are trying to have a 30-year vision of the city, a cleaner vision that helps the city, helps the businesses, cleans it up, clarifies, and guess what? It's not going to be as easy as it was for other businesses. That's too bad.
And we're not saying don't stop fundraising.
No, because like Marcy said, she would gladly take it down. And I'm sure other businesses will do the same
I
thing.
don't know who wouldn't, for a day, 8
For
days a
8
year.
days, I mean, give me a break.
If they're gonna support a charity, they're gonna do it.
Are you gonna allow temporary flag signs or no? In this way we're talking now. As a former Kiwanis, I'm gonna fight for the Kiwanis.
So, okay, so I need to bring this.
Discuss one flag.
I need to bring this back to what our original discussion was. With what I've heard so far, which seems to be either the consensus or the loudest, I'm not sure which. but, what I've kind of heard so far is that you oppose signage in the right-of-way or the travel-way, whatever definition you use, right-of-way or travel-way, okay? Which means that this ordinance, which is based on the idea that we take control of the state's right-of-way, is not as important.
I don't think we said that. We said we are supporting wayfaring.
No, I understand that. I understand that. I'm talking about, those are going to be governmental signs that we put up in connection with the businesses. I mean all of these other things that we're talking about. And so what I'm hearing is that if you want to go down that route, and that's what I'm hearing, then this issue of travel-way versus right-of-way is not as important. One thing I do need to check on, though, is whether or not that one picture that we saw that shows where the travel way and right of way is, whether or not that's still an issue. I don't believe it is based upon our discussion. So that may be, that, in what you've decided on the, or what you are considering on the direction that you want to go, that takes that argument quite a bit out of the picture. We'll check into it a little bit more, but it may not be necessary.
The projecting signs, we still would not be able to do.
Except in the case of the specific sign.
That's why we want to do travel way, so we can allow blade signs, right?
So, I guess that kind of leads me to the next thing. Do you support projecting signs?
Yes.
The perpendicular.
Blade signs.
Perpendicular
Yes.
signs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So you were saying that currently, because they extend out off of the building, that if the right-of-way is right at the line of the building, that sign wouldn't be allowed because it extends into the right-of-way.
That's
So
what I
when I was in
understand.
last week and I was talking to you, Emery, I thought that you mentioned that blade signs were encouraged and that they were not included in the allowed signage, that they were an exception to the current allowed signage because they weren't encouraged.
For the, under the current ordinance, for the sign allowances for permanent signs in Ocean Lake, they are not counted as part of that allowance.
Right.
But that doesn't.
But it would only be in a
negate
place if you don't have that.
Correct.
Okay.
It still doesn't negate the right of way.
That makes sense. So some business frontages would be able to have that because they've got like 2 feet or 3 feet in front of their building, and others are right at the edge.
For instance, the Sapphire Center would not be able to have any because their building goes right up to right of way.
That's not a good one to use, because that is within the area we already control. That's actually a good,
that's true.
That's actually a good test case in our discussions with ODOT. They would not have, because we now have an agreement with them. If one of those buildings wanted to put a perpendicular sign and it didn't extend past that new right-of-way line, that should be okay. That's a good question. That's a good test case to ask them and their attorneys.
Rick, I'm hearing a contradiction in our thought process here. If on the one hand, we're discussing the possibility of feather banners or A-frames or something on the sidewalk, but not obstructing traffic, so that in what we're calling the travel way, those would be in the right-of-way, but we're saying it's okay because they're not obstructing anything. These projecting blade signs, which are elevated, right, they're over a certain height, are not going to be obstructing any traffic because they're over everybody's head. So I don't understand why it even matters if they're extending into the right-of-way. Why is that even a part of the discussion?
Because ODOT doesn't allow it.
But then we're going by that, then that's the attorney's viewpoint, so that applies also to the feather banners. That's why I'm seeing the contradiction in the way we're even looking at this.
Well, I think that what you're really getting at is that there is much that we've already heard has not been enforced. Some have, but much has not.
I'm sorry, on the one hand, so it sounds like the discussion's boiled down to, do we allow feather banners and A-frame or A-frame signs on the sidewalk, or these projecting perpendicular signs? Either way, they're going to go into the right-of-way. So to say that projecting signs are in the right-of-way, that's a problem. That's the same problem you had for the feather banners, which we were choosing to overlook. So I don't see why it matters if the projecting signs go into the right-of-way if they're over everybody's head and not blocking traffic.
That would be the case under this ordinance that we have proposed, because we define travel way,
Right.
and we have said that it can't obstruct. So if you have a perpendicular blade sign, it's up high enough, it extends into the travel way, that would not violate this ordinance.
That goes to my point, yeah.
I would just like to say, maybe we could talk about this in a different way. There seems to be, maybe with some exception, 3 things that we've agreed on. One flag, a perpendicular blade sign, and the wayfinding signs. And so instead of trying to manipulate this ordinance into that, how about taking those 3, if that's where we're going, those 3 points and you guys work on how to do that.
Right, right.
I mean, instead of we're going around and round and round this drain, and I just, I think that's the direction, at least what I do.
Judy?
Well, in addition to those three, what about the Taft agreement would still stay intact throughout this? The Taft, whatever that Taft agreement was.
Yeah, that's not going away.
Okay, so how about, can you make like a Nell Scott agreement to sort of like have the flexibility that the Taft does because of the uniqueness? If you said the city owns property from ODOT in Taft, can't the city do that in Nell Scott?
Sure.
So could that facilitate their needs and make them unique? Sort of like Taft agreement?
Well, based on everything we've heard, yes, it would in the context of a blade sign that is projecting out of the wall.
Right.
A flag that is high enough that it is not obstructing traffic, but is projecting out into the travelway. So yes, that would take care of that as well. It would not take care of flags being placed out in the curb.
But if they
Or
were.
banner, or feather banners, because those are the things, or A-frames, because those are things you're saying that you do not want to have.
But if it were to be consistent throughout the city, wouldn't that facilitate that consistency in Nell Scott?
Yes, I think so, if I understand what you're asking.
Couldn't we make an agreement to allow advertising in the right-of-way, travel-way, but only as these blade signs? That would be the only, that would be the only
No,
allowance.
No, the only, if you're talking about an agreement with ODOT that says you can do one kind of sign but not the other, no. They were very specific with me that they have jurisdictional authority as long as it is considered to be state right-of-way. And they will not change what is allowed and what is not allowed. The only way to go past that, according to our ODOT officials, is for them to not be the jurisdictional authority, which is to have an agreement with us that we take over from the front of the curb back.
And then if we did that, then we could write an ordinance that only allows the blade signs.
Yes, exactly.
Could you also provide some of those examples that you saw in Nashville of the benefits of beyond signage of taking that?
Oh, sure. There was a lot of things, interesting enough, and again, this is the city of Franklin. Greenery, plants, potted plants, trees, those kind of things. Under the TDOT regulations, those weren't permitted either. And so once they got control of that, then they were able to put in the potted plants, the trees, the things like that as well. So for them at least, it went beyond just signs.
So then, to Richard's point of if we were to do that, and then we would violate the law. But if, I understand, I'm just trying to get my this plus this equals not violating law.
As I understand what the state, so think of where the way it was defined to me, and this actually was in your packet from the October 7th meeting. It is where they are the jurisdictional authority. Their authority ends where they say it ends. And if they were to have an agreement with us that says it ends here, then they are no longer the jurisdictional authority over the sidewalks. That's as I understand it, it's been explained to me.
So, Richard, so if I can, so then, how does that not violate state law?
Well, I think it violates state law because there's a hierarchy. You got the Oregon Constitution, you got the Oregon statutes, you got the Oregon administrative rules, and then you have what some guy at ODOT tells you that's not supported by anything. This is a state law, okay? And the state law says it's a $1,000 a day fine, state statute, $1,000 a day fine to place signs in the state right of way. And ODOT doesn't get to wave their hands and say this is no longer state right of way, because a process. You can't dispose of, every time ODOT wants to give us right away, they have to go through a disposition process, just like you do, when you dispose of property. So, I haven't been in these meetings with ODOT, but I can read state law, and it says you can't place the sign in the state right of way. Now, their administrative rules go further and say, and if you're a city and you want to place a sign that's visible from the state right of way, you have to follow this process. And by the way, you city can't place a sign in the state right of way or cause a sign to be placed in the state right of way, which to me means if we define our ordinance in a way, create an exemption or a permit that lets people put things in the right of way, we're causing things to be placed in the right of way, and we're violating that $1,000 a day penalty.
So then, could we go into a formal agreement of the ODOT disposing of this travel way, right of way, and if then we work on the blade signs and all of that, do it so we don't violate the statute, so that it's formal.
Well, one, I think that's a legal question you can get answered.
I'm asking us, can we go that route? Yes, this is the intention,
I think
to go that way. And also have
the whole idea of us applying for wayfinding blade signs is a great idea. It's something that you can work with them on, but I still think they're not going to be allowing you to put it in the right of way. I still think you might have to have them relinquish right of way, which I don't think is just a signed agreement. I think it's more process than that.
just that's, and yes, let's go that way, but formally the right way without just being like, oh, here's our ordinance and call it good.
Right.
Right, yeah. Just so that we're.
I'm not sure that I've ever said it that way. Come on, guys, I've worked with government for a long time. I know process, and I know what state bureaucracies are like, and I'm quite certain that there's not one guy in ODOT who's going, we'll do whatever, and I don't care what my bosses say. They know process.
There's one people in ODOT who will do whatever they please. This idea that ODOT is going to impose $1,000 a day fine inside the city limits for a sign in the right of way is ridiculous. They are not going to do it because they won't do it. The person who made most of the nice signs in town, Dean Haller, some of you remember him, some of you don't. He asked ODOT about that, and because there were signs that weren't legal, and ODOT said, we don't enforce that inside the city limits. Not to say that I encourage you to say.
Is this your guy at ODOT?
I think all of us know that ODOT doesn't tend to just show up and be enforcing this, but I think that what we should be trying to do with this is, the reason we're at where we are now, with the way the town looks and the way signs are, and the old ones that are there, and everything that's already grandfathered in, is because it hasn't been enforced. There hasn't been an understandable, enforceable code. And so, yes, we could accept that and move forward and just say, oh, well, let's just do it because ODOT's not going to care. But then we're in the same boat. So what I personally would like to see, and what I like about the wayfinding idea, and maybe temporarily allowing the flags and the banners until we get a system in place to allow that for businesses. But to me, that's something that's looking forward. That's going to not just try and allow what's already been there. Because part of what is written right now, seems to me, is we're trying to allow what's already been happening and find a way to make it allowed but limited, because everyone's been breaking the law and no one's been enforcing it. So I think we need to ignore that it's not going to be enforced. That should be what we're trying to change here, is have a code that does make sense, that we can enforce, and make the enforcement easier because people understand it and they're not breaking the law all the time. So,
Yay.
Well, I love the travel because I don't understand it.
I don't have all the extra time code enforcement.
I'm big on the travel way. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay. That was fun.
You guys are gonna put a couple 100,000 for wayfinding.
Why don't we, so why don't we, take a break and switch topics? It's 10:30 almost. Yeah, why don't you stand up and stretch and we'll come back.
Take an actual break.
For design.
Just to let everyone know, the microphones will stay on, so.
Two here.
So go in the hallway to talk.
Oh, yeah.
What? You trapped the energy?
Stop trying to read it. Friday will be my last. I'm like, sing it all the time. Start at the same.
Please, just know.
I'm going to
I think putting up signs.
My son will be starting on. It's a career change, actually. 15 years in land use. I'm like, okay, let's go see the other side. The
next 5 years.
Make it to the morning forum?
I'm pretty excited. It's gonna be a
I did.
big challenge.
I was.
New learning.
Sue was on the radio, Riley was on the radio,
in our agreement in town.
And yeah, they
declared
declared
a surplus and transfer.
Macon, Patsy, and
Big group?
yeah.
Good.
Townsend showed up at 8:30.
8:30. You didn't know how long it's been there.
I didn't.
I woke up at 6 or 6:30 this morning and just kind of putting around, had a cup of coffee before I noticed. It was 5 after 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah.
Fair. I didn't stand up before that.
You guys just might have to do rock, paper, scissors on that one.
I don't stand the.
Yeah, Mike's on.
Shred them. You must sort them, clean them, shred them, and then make, I have to make the shredder.
Volunteers are the best I've ever worked with.
pause
That's
those
the
mics
craziest
there.
thing. I need it.
Those ones that you can buy are like $5.
The school district.
Yeah. Right. I will need some unique parts.
I can't use the mics.
Well, just turn around, turn your back. Where are these?
Oh, yeah.
It gets even you, Lenny.
Oh, I didn't know he ever had trouble getting me. When you said who could speak the loudest, hit me. When I yelled, stop and roll in machines.
Anne-Marie's gonna conduct this next part.
Go, good.
Which means it'll probably be.
Friends. So make this shredder. And then
You're
I
doing
buy
fine.
the parts and then put it all together.
Let me give you that nice thing. He was a good person. Oh, that's very exciting.
You started about
And then
signs that are going to go on the.
In the school.
Right now, I've got only one that's gonna be the one that's on the building. I would like, I've got a vision of what I would like to see, but we'll see what's gonna happen. Right now, right at the top of the entrance, the building, the city police, on the sketch. Nobody's really talked to me about where something else might go.
3D printer.
Much education.
Marketing's not always as straightforward as you think sometimes. A few years ago, I
Yeah, I think that kind of falls on the traditional signs, but there, like, there should be a blue police sign. Actually, there should also be a sign out there pointing to the Devil's Lake Fire.
So we're gonna, after this, we're gonna go get
So, because that, actually that is an unnamed street, it's actually a driveway. It's runs from the post office. So, but, for a long time in front of the old building, we had one of those kind of wood carved Lincoln City PD signs with the seagulls on it. Of course, it kind of got deteriorated. It disappeared as we started on this new building. I'd like to see something similar to that. New challenge point that has our badge and our so we'll have to kind of wait until they get the landscaping done. See if we go that route, but then we go back to our work. Building we get bigger, so.
So difficult.
One guy's like, I've been in one of them all. Plastic.
Everybody's got to have a finger in the pot, and there's no way to arrive at a consensus about what's right and what's wrong, and then you throw the state in the mix.
Did you find out?
I want to drag it out for half a year.
How far was it? 350 miles?
Yeah.
Joe Dominic. Sure you will.
Nothing wrong with that. You should know how to do
Head lobster.
I used to 48 square feet sign on my bill. And I've had people stand under that sign with I got a sign that's got a covered in bigger than it's allowed.
Oh, yeah, the official.
I know. It doesn't even matter.
We're getting there. I've got all those grants ready to go. I just need to, like I said, soon we get parks on where I put them there in the park. Yeah.
Person in charge. You guys could have come up with a better answer than me on the last one.
I wish we could wiggle all of that in, I mean, not just because I'm a former Kiwanian, but because it's cool.
Probably less than 100 votes, and any kind of like.
You don't, I don't really hear away from the guy that wants my I should have just. Figure out which one, you'll get your own here and then decide on the front, and then go to those businesses.
We can let them use all that.
See, and already you wanted exceptions, tax business.
I don't want exceptions. That's the same thing.
I'm not fighting over that. You need one time.
Yeah, let me go ASAP on that, because I've got to get all that stuff in there.
Put that money in the I just want the person who owns my building to take that money off. I'm not gonna pay that. Absentee landlords are not well known for keeping their building. Absentee landlords are not well known.
My landlord actually runs a different business that they own, and they own a building, and they run another business out of the same building. And I got pictures on my phone of their garbage pile that I had talked to code enforcement. They just built an enclosure for dumpsters because code enforcement finally told them it was required. And they literally still have their dumpster and their big garbage thing with raccoons and seagulls and crows and all that. I mean, it is a mess. But they can do whatever they want because not everyone has to follow the rules.
Okay,
They shouldn't.
Right away, short.
I think that's a very smart move. Next day, so you the second day. But that's all I'm saying.
Not so much. It's the only way kids can eat pesto. I don't have pesto, no. I should get some pesto though. Yeah, no, that's a good idea. I can do a lot with pesto.
Well, everything's doing well, and
I was thinking about growing some basil, making a bunch of pesto.
gorgeous water, so many days.
Every day now. I used to open it on weekends, but just don't get the traffic in. So much of the traffic during the day is families around there, and then the daytime drinking.
What's the best you ever
My place. They go to the places they've always gone and they drink all day.
Yeah, actually, they're one of the,
This is the big,
almost one of the
piles of trash.
catch.
All piled up.
If you don't keep your rod in the right place, they get up close to the close over here and you don't have your,
Somebody else coming out saying, well, you did it for that.
Greg sent all the sets so they can go.
I have sent these pictures to code enforcement over and over and over and over again. I get people thinking it's my business.
Yeah.
So people really got into the offshore stuff, doing commercial fishing, things like some pilots, docks. The size of some of those monsters, they don't even kayak, just chills me.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's a 90-pound fish.
Yeah, that's right. I'm interested in doing that.
But they do it, they go by the water, big toast. Come and pick one up.
If they do,
The spot that everyone goes downtown.
Where is that? Sea River? Downtown Ocean. Ocean Lake, except that's uptown. I actually call it a district.
That's in City Hall, where downtown.
Well, that's funny, actually, when I first started, people were talking about downtown. I go, there is no downtown. Where's downtown? Where's the city's living room? Where is downtown? I don't think so.
And most people, when they see that,
Could be arguably.
Tech is like almost elevated.
Right out the jaws, right out.
I don't make one out of my living room, I don't go down to Tech.
They did.
well, they started with you. I just got to know you.
Fight like crazy out there.
We usually out 4 or 5 hours.
All right, we can get going for round 2.
We have handouts for round 2.
Head out to round 2.
We do not have handouts for round 2. It's so long, I didn't want to print all that paper. So I pulled up the packet from the last commission. And essentially, I just have some questions as follow-up from the last work session to clarify direction of how you would like to proceed. So I'll kind of start not in any specific order, but there was a lot of discussion about the view
the view portion that we were putting into place in the new ordinance that our current ordinance doesn't have. And the new ordinance proposes that in the pearls, buildings are no more than 200 feet wide, and in the strings, they are no more than 300 feet wide without a 25-foot break. And there was a lot of discussion at the last work session on where you wanted to, if you wanted to make that 200 feet or 300 feet the same for pearls and strings, or if you wanted to keep that 200 or 300, and I'm going to get to that page here momentarily. Page 58. So this is how it reads right now, that buildings should be no more than 200 feet in width along street frontages and designated pearls, and no more than 300 feet outside of designated pearls in the north-south direction to allow view corridors through the site. And then the distance between the buildings would be no less than 25 feet. And then our little diagram picture, so it would look like that. So here's one that shows 200 feet in a designated pearl with a 25-foot break, and then this one as either 200 or 300 feet as being outside of a pearl. So the question is, do we want the 200 to be the same throughout, or do you want the different 200 for pearl, 300 for non-pearl?
What's the reasoning behind the difference?
Pearl is more, the reasoning is that the pearl is more significant. That makes the pearl stand out more, and that the string is not as significant.
I mean, when I think about the pearls, there's not a lot of places you can see the ocean.
Not from 101, correct?
Not from 101 in the pearls.
My own personal preference would be that this apply only to the, first block off of the water, because if you own property on the waterfront, bluff or wherever, you can create a view. But the guy behind you who owns his own property can pick where his own separation is, and then you're just to have behind his property, you may have a view of the hotel that has their view on a different location. So I'm not sure that the way that the consultants currently drafted it would meet the intent of preserving views. There's other ways to address that with public right-of-way that we currently have off of 101 towards the waterfront. I'm not sure that the way that the standards are currently drafted gets to the goal or the intent of why you have that section in the standard.
Correct.
And there's no vertical view protection.
That's kind of what I was wondering about too. That seems like it would block a lot more than you.
And that comes into height. So, and which then leads me to my second point is, in the current ordinance, which is carried forward into the proposed, there's no change to the minimum or maximum height. There's a minimum height requirement of 18 feet. Minimum. So all new construction has to be at least 18 feet.
For commercial use.
So the question is, if you are concerned about height, do you want to keep that 18-foot minimum height requirement, or make it lower, or do away with it? How does that interact with your desire for view protection, with having a minimum height requirement of 18 feet?
Well, if you're in a car, it's still gonna be blocked. I mean,
What's the purpose of the 18 feet minimum?
I don't know. I don't know, because it's there now. It's also in the Ocean Lake, the Taft and the Nelscott design standards. So whoever worked on putting together all of those ordinances, that is the minimum that they determined needed to be in place.
who is this to protect? Homeowners, pedestrians, car drivers? What is this, from what perspective?
Will you go, is there an intent statement for the view protection?
It's to acknowledge, and this is the intent, to acknowledge the existing key natural and scenic views of the Pacific Ocean, and Planning Commission has recommended to add Siletz Bay and Siletz River, and leverage context-sensitive design to minimize impact to these views. Design solutions include changing height, bulk, setbacks, or orientation to frame or retain partial views. But, so the first sentence speaks to the intent.
To what perspective? From someone in their two-story house? From the pedestrian or from the car driving?
I think from the cars.
That's what I'm saying, like, some would apply and some wouldn't apply. If I'm in a two-story house across the street, I don't care how long it is. You know, so.
I was driving through, I think I mentioned last time, Rockaway, and on 101, and it was like, I was not aware there was an ocean nearby because it was a solid wall. And I kind of like the break of 25 feet, 200 feet throughout, make it throughout the city. I think we need to make sure that people who live here or are traveling through Lincoln City are always reminded every now and then that we're right next to the ocean.
Well, and wasn't this so all north-south roads, so it's not just 101?
Right.
And to your point, Steve, on ocean, because you're right, there's probably a lot of 101, you don't see the ocean, right? But I interpret this as also to create or to avoid having the canyon concept of buildings.
Because it's not just the ocean, it's also the forests to the east, and you want to maintain those.
As you're driving through any oceanfront street, think of the spaces between the houses in the different areas. How much of that ocean sensation are you getting with that? You know what I mean? Just think of what it is already and how it is already. And are you going through neighborhoods and hoping to get to the ocean, or do you go 5 more blocks and go to the beach access and park there? So I mean, yes, I understand that, but also how realistically difficult is it to have that feeling and sensation of the ocean as you're driving? I don't feel like this is necessary.
I agree with the code as it's written there. I think it's very important to preserve these corridors and these views. Just in the few years I've been the district manager of the Devil's Lake District, one thing we struggle with is visibility. We have a beautiful lake that fronts Highway 101 in more than one location. We can't see it anywhere. Now, some of that is natural barriers, which is fine, wetlands and things that need to be preserved. But a lot of it are Chinese restaurants, hotels, whatever. Some of the most gorgeous places that we have, near the river especially, are solid.
Yeah, when I used to work for a vacation rental company, I would, the Ocean View houses would fill up, and I would tell people, oh, hey, there's a house on the lake, and they would say, well, we want to stay in Lincoln City.
What's our own sign on Highway 101?
They had no idea that there was a lake in the middle of Lincoln City. There are
directional
people that don't even realize it.
It ties everything together, of course.
That's why we have that octopus. You never know.
I love seeing him on the track, by the way. I love the branding. It stands out.
It's one of the reasons why we chose the octopus.
So when you said one in Lincoln City,
It sounds like I'm hearing general consensus is 200 feet and do away with the 300. Other than that, it's good with the addition of the planning commission's Siletz Bay.
Forest, Siletz Bay, Siletz River.
Okay.
And also D Lake.
Did we have a measurement of current motels already? What's the typical length or hotels along the ocean?
Too long.
I talked with Sandy about that.
And how many would violate this?
And the only way to get that is there isn't available GIS data to be able to do that. You would have to go out and physically measure each building.
So how many non-compliant buildings would we make immediately after passing this?
I don't know.
Since we haven't measured it.
That's what I'm saying.
But yes, I'm non-compliant, you're not gonna go tear them down.
Right.
No,
It would apply to new
I understand.
But I think it's to start setting up for when they remodel or, tear downs and rebuilding, and that's what you want to be thinking of, because You're right.
I don't have any gauge. I don't know if 200 is
and I'm with you.
regular or small or big or whatever. And we're saying, yeah, 200 because it's smaller. None of us know how typical big a thing is.
I would just.
We won't go measure every building, but we can do a sampling. So I can think of about 4 or 5 that I want to go and measure.
Just so that we have it, I mean,
we can send you that information.
Yeah,
so that we
that'd be a, what's 200 look like?
I'll tell you. 200 feet is a Portland block downtown.
Yeah, but now give me a
So-
building on the Oregon coast in Lincoln City.
That's 200
Yeah,
feet.
not everyone lived in Portland
That's
for
a
40
whole-
years.
There are a lot of them.
We're looking for one.
Here, I'll
The
find you one.
hotels
It's a
down by
sea-
the sands.
The Sea Gypsy is approximately 300 feet in length.
The Sea Gypsy.
Sea Gypsy, right at Northwest Second.
Yeah, Northwest Second.
That's a big structure.
So maybe 200 is too long. I'm thinking, I live across the street from the Sandcastle, and they bought this vacant lot where this house burned down, and whoop, they just grew up some more motel.
Yep.
And so now it's even longer. So
Yeah.
maybe 200 feet is too long.
What's
It's
the
too long.
sandcastle? We're good, you know.
I don't know. I think
Decent.
Because
I don't
they
know.
need that.
We're just
How much
saying
does that 25 feet do? Because like what I'm picturing, like what I think of when I'm hearing this is D-Sands. And I used to work right across the street, and so you've got D-Sands, which is at least two buildings, but there's a gap right in between. And from what I heard, there was maybe 1 week a year that you could actually see the sunset right between that gap. But what I'm wondering is how big is that gap? Is that 25 feet? Is it 40 feet? And how big is it? Are you really getting a view from that 25-foot gap?
It would be helpful to have some
So
examples.
D-Sands, where it goes like right by D River Wayside, where we've got like one of our most picturesque views of the ocean driving through town. And then you've got the big long, so like how long is that? How big is the gap? Like just for visual reference of, I don't know how big 25 feet looks when you're driving by at 30 miles an hour.
Exactly.
We'll bring that information
Yeah.
back. We'll pick out half a dozen or so.
So my lot is 50 by 100. So that's half of the house. It's nothing. It's nothing.
These are 6 foot.
But from a perspective of being,
Side conversation.
When you're talking to the idea of, is it 200 feet too long and is 25 feet big enough? You're going to meet the most opposition, I think, the shorter the building and the longer the opening, because that land is incredibly valuable. And people who have motels and are going to fight to keep the motels are going to have a real problem with that. So I think if you get, I think it's a lovely idea, but I think if you get too careful, you're going to meet a lot of opposition.
So this seems to refer to specifically multiple structures on one lot. So it doesn't apply to space between buildings on separate lots. There's some sort of setback rule though, right? What's the commercial setback?
7 feet per every 15 or something?
No, there are no setbacks in the general commercial zone, unless you're abutting a
You can build
residential.
you can build right to the property line?
But up to whatever building code requires.
That's what I'm asking.
So it could be 200 feet, 10 feet, 200 feet, 10 feet, 200 feet, 10 feet.
You've been on Motel Row.
Could be. Or 200 feet, 5 feet,
Is it
200 feet, 5
Well,
feet, whatever it is.
Usually
Just to answer your question.
setback between the end of the building and the parking lot.
To answer your question, Counselor Mark, in the recreation commercial and general commercial, planning does not have a side yard setback. You can build 2. Now, the design standards proposed are stating for frontages in Pearls and on some high-use streets that you actually have to build within 10 feet of the property line for your structure. Building code, however, for fire ingress and egress, depending on the height of the structure, you could have larger side yard setbacks necessary for the fire apparatus to get around it. So just because the planning standards may not have a side yard, you're depending on whether it's a 2-story, 3-story, or 4-story, the fire code
The
will
reality
regulate that.
is there's going to be space between the buildings. That's what I was,
Yeah.
is it 20 feet, because you have to have at least 10 or something?
Right.
It really does depend on the height of the structure.
and then this is for one lot. Now, if they bought multiple lots and made one building across all 4 lots, how does that apply to this?
In order to do that, you would have to combine all of the lots to one lot.
So there would be one lot. If they're all different parcels, they would have to meet this.
But you could have one building.
But I can have.
Your one building can only be 200 feet.
What about like the Esther Lee and they have multiple buildings on the same thing? So if it was 4 lots and they built within 5 feet between each one of them and each lot had its own building.
This would say you can't do that.
I believe it says that you need to have no less than 25 feet wide, so that they would not have been able to be that close to each other.
On different lots. They did not make it one lot. It
Distance-
is 4 lots with 4 buildings.
Yeah, distance between buildings should be no less than 25 feet wide and citing multiple structures on one lot.
Right, but what I'm asking is 4 lots, 4 buildings.
They could be 5 feet apart, or 10 feet apart.
Right, the way it's written right now, they would not have to meet that 25-foot width.
Right, just so that we're clear.
And then
Unless you want that changed.
We want to see the ocean.
You want to see the ocean?
I go to the.
And then the distinction between the pearls and the strings, I had never heard that distinction. Is that something everybody talks about?
Pearl and string?
Pearl and string.
It's like a 2008 thing.
And there's a difference, so there's a difference because of density or why do we make the distinction?
It goes back to the visioning process that the city went through a decade better ago, in which they identified pearls, which is essentially the original cities, and how that look should be done, and versus the strings or the areas that separate them. It has also become one of the key marketing components that the city has that we promote. It's the pearls that are connected by strings.
Yeah, but then why have different rules? That's what I'm kind of wondering what the point of changing. You can have a 300-foot building and a string, a 200-foot building and a pearl, and I'm not sure what we're accomplishing.
One of the things that's important to point out, in our last discussion, we got lost quite a bit in pearls versus strings. Okay, this ordinance pertains to the strings. Okay, if we feel that there is something that should be done differently with the pearls, then we can come back and address that at another time. One of the things that I was a little frustrated with in our last meeting is that we got so caught up in pearls versus strings that we lost the discussion on this ordinance
So
itself.
this ordinance being the design, commercial design standards.
Is for the strings.
It's for the strings.
Now, it's for each of the pearls though, right?
No.
Because 3 of the pearls have their own code.
Let me, because that's actually my next point after getting through view, was the differences in this proposed ordinance between pearls, strings, and high-use streets. And that was brought up last time with what is the difference. So let me give you a little background as to what exists right now. Right now, Ocean Lake, Nelscott, and Taft all have a set of design standards. They're the same. Wacoma, Cutler City, and DeLake don't have a set specifically designated to their name, but the properties in those pearls that are zoned GC and RC fall under the current commercial design standards, which are, for all intents and purposes, the same as what are in Ocean Lake, Taft, and Nelscott. So essentially, all 6 pearls right now have all the same commercial design standards.
But the strings do not.
The strings do not.
So we're
So
essentially perpetuating multiple rules for different areas in the city.
Correct. What there is present right now in Chapter 1774, which is the design standard for general commercial and recreation commercial, is there are a few things that do have differences for the strings that are different from the pearls. Those have been carried forward into this proposed ordinance with the additional delineation of high-use streets. So the proposed ordinance not only has pearls and strings, but it also has high-use streets. However, the differences in the standards between those are very minute. And I went through and I did a little listing of what those differences are. I am not going to go through every design standard because that would take too long and it would be really boring. But what I will point out are the few differences, and you'll be able to see that there really aren't that many differences between what we require for the pearl, what we require for the string, and what we are now asking for the high-use streets. For instance, ground floor transparency, that is one of the items that has a difference between pearls, strings, and high-use streets. In the pearls, the ground floor transparency, and that's windows, glazing, or doors with windows in them, is 60%. In the strings and high-use streets, it's 40%. For building entrances, in the pearls, you have to have one primary entrance plus one entrance for every 40 feet of building street frontage. In the strings, you're only required one entrance. And in the high-use streets, you required an average of one entrance for every 90 feet or less of building street frontage.
This would be good to have on paper so we can follow. And if I could, I just have one comment, is we don't find this boring at all.
Oh, okay.
Half the city council were planning commissioners before, so we like this detail.
Okay.
Anyway, I just like to look at stuff.
I agree. Do you want me to make a copy of this and come back with it?
All 3 pages.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be back.
If you can get at it, so much for technology.
So I have a question, Mary, that in the,
If you can make it right there.
No, I know how to use the copy.
in the discussions of signs, the businesses seem to be generally opposed to having different rules for different areas of the city. In the design review charrettes and things that you did with the public, did they have the same feeling, or was there a strong sense that whatever can be done to differentiate the pearls from the strings should be perpetuated?
For the design standards or for signs?
For the design standards. I'm just asking, sign people seem to want the same rules throughout the city. I'm asking if the design people felt the same way, that there should be the same rules throughout the city, or that there should be this perpetuating individuality of the pearls, which I think most people visiting here have no idea what a
The
pearl is.
results of the public outreach, when this whole design standard revision got started, I think 2 years ago, the results showed that they wanted distinction between pearls.
I would say that Anne Marie is correct, that there isn't a lot of differentiation between pearls, strings, and high-use streets in this ordinance as proposed. But the biggest difference is the uses within the distinct zones that apply to those. When there are, automotive services allowed in strings that aren't allowed in zones that are applied in pearls. There's other distinctions that might be a bigger question on, it seems like you try to tackle one aspect of the code to, let's get design, but then you're saying, okay, well, actually, we need to look at uses, we need to look at our zoning, is this right for 101? Do we want this off 101? Do we need industrial outside of the visibility area of our tourism? I think that one of the main dichotomies that the design standard ordinance is dealing with is that you do have a plethora of uses allowed on 101, on our high-use streets, inside pearls, outside of pearls, and And if it's the council's decision to create unity and one Lincoln City and wayfinding and uniformity in our garbage receptacles and other things, maybe we need to also look at the uniformity of how we can apply that. And not continue this competition of where's downtown, what is downtown, or my part's better than your part, but we're all uniform Lincoln City. But that just opened a bigger can of worms outside of design
Well,
standards.
and that's why I
So.
wanted to point out that there are no differences between the design standards in place right now, between the different pearls. They're all the same. Ocean Lake, Nelscott, Taft, and the design standards for general, commercial, and recreation, they're the same. It requires the same building height, the same minimum, the same setbacks, the same step backs, the same roof lines, the same materials, the same colors. And so that's what I'm trying to get at is, do you want that to continue, or do you want a distinction? What we're presenting right now continues along the same line of all the pearls are the same. The strings have some specific differences, less transparency, less number of entrances,
setback,
less step back, less, there are some very minute differences in the way they talk about color. And when he comes back with I'll get to the packet page. And so that's what I was trying to get at is, do you want those to be more significant between the pearls and the strings? Or you want the pearls and the strings to be the same? Because there was a lot of discussion in the last session about differences between pearls and strings.
Miles?
I've been coming here since 1951, and I've lived here for the last 10 years full-time. And I still am confused on what is the string and what is the pearl. And I don't think that Lincoln City should be tied to those designations, because no one really understands that is visiting the community.
But that is my question to you all.
But I will suggest to you that the people who live in those pearls know the difference.
Start over.
I will suggest to you that the people who live in those pearls know the difference. Maybe not the visitors. It may not be noticeable to the visitors that Nelscott looks different than Ocean Lake or Taft, but the people who live there care a great deal.
But there's no
That's how it got
distinction in the
started.
codes anyway.
I'm sorry.
Is kind of the point, is the idea is, let's have a code for Nelscott, a code for Taft, a code for Ocean Lake, a code for the other pearls,
I'm
and
sorry,
a
I
code for the
was-
string, but they all say the same thing. So it's like there's the idea of distinction without any actual distinction. Is
And
the
that's
issue.
my point, and especially in Nelscott. The Nelscott people want Nelscott to be unique. They have a fair number of unique ordinances there, design standards there, and
They don't.
in a non-commercial area.
The historical development is distinct. But current development all complies and looks exactly like what would go in at Ocean Lake or down at Taft.
New development would look the same. If someone came in today and wanted to build a new building in Ocean Lake, or Taft, or Nelscott, or the GC zone, or the RC zone, it's going to look the same regardless of where they placed it.
But you can't, for instance, have buildings with drive-ups in Nelscott.
But that's a use.
Right. Uses are different.
Well, you're talking about the actual picture.
I'm talking about the
Physical.
design
Right.
standards.
So, I guess where I'm, because I have a tendency to agree that uniform throughout. And for me, it's because I don't envision the strings as we envision today as always vacant.
Right.
I mean, we've already done master planning on the east side of 101 for Nelscott.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to envision that, using 200 or 300 foot or whatever why all of a sudden we'd be in one area on Hellscott and it's 200, and then because you move 200 feet or 400 feet with new development, and it's different.
Yeah.
And I think it ought to be, because hopefully in our lifetime, we see those strings getting filled in. And there ought to
My
be.
lifetime is gonna happen quicker.
Right, and because the
Don't
pearls are
rush it.
still, they don't grow, because they're historically decimated, so we're not expanding what we're calling the pearl, even though realistically, they are growing. Yes.
So that is my question. With the minute difference that there are in the standards, as we'll see, there's hardly any difference between the strings and the pearls. Do you want to continue those minute differences, or do you want to have either eliminate the string not the string designation, but the string differences and have them all be pearls, or eliminate the pearl differences so that it's all the same?
One Lincoln City.
Yeah, one Lincoln City.
One Lincoln City with the Pearl neighborhoods.
Yeah, neighborhoods, exactly.
But I think what Anne Marie is asking is that, do you prefer the design standards that are required right now for pearls to be applied consistently citywide?
Yes.
Or do you prefer the
Yes.
design standards for strings to be applied?
No.
Pearls.
The pearls.
Now that
Okay.
we're not changing the area of the pearls, we're
Right.
not changing the neighborhoods, we're just applying it everywhere.
7 mile long pearl.
Yep.
May I ask one question? That's what we should be. In our last meeting, you saw pictures. Okay, think of Ocean Lake today. Think of the villages today. Not the villages, I'm thinking Nelscott today. And then look at those pictures and say in 25 years, that's what it's gonna look like, and it won't look like what it does today. That's the big thing you need to look at. The pictures that we had that show what will happen as redevelopment happens, and what you have and what you have today. What is today goes away. 25 years from now, it looks like the pictures that you have in here. That's the thing to consider.
And Ron is correct, that the value of the historic distinctions that we have throughout the 7 miles is unique to Lincoln City. However, we could value and choose to create policy that values those historic structures, but new structures should be, consistent too. So there's a fine balance on how to address without imposing burdensome redevelopment on historic structures. The ability to also keep that eclecticness that we have. I think we've all been to newer cities where it's just extremely sterile, where it's corporate, and I don't believe that the essence of Lincoln City is that the desire is to go to that approach.
Okay.
On your notes here, at the bottom, it says color, which I find interesting. Talks about the string or high-use streets, base colors must be low reflective shades of any hue. And then it talks about pearls may choose color palettes, blah, 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 blah. So to me, that's not a minor distinction. That's kind of a big deal, right? So we're saying if we did pearls, it would be the last one, as opposed to the strings, right?
Right. So we'll just, along those lines, we'll run through the things that are different so that you can see how they would be if we eliminated those differences. So start at the top, ground floor transparency, go to packet page 67. Which it's a long package number on there. But in the pearls, ground floor transparency is required 60%. In the strings and high-use streets is 40%. So if we eliminated that difference, everything would be 60% transparency on the ground floor.
I think if we made it more universal too, then building development wouldn't be so choicey, and that, hey, this is just the way that it is in Lincoln City, then it would like, well, I couldn't do this here, I could do that there, but the price is more here, and the price is from a future building perspective, that they know no matter what, it's going to be the standard, period. And I think that might encourage, help that whole city development.
So everyone's on an even playing field.
Right.
So make the transparency 50%.
Was the thinking that in the Pearl District you would have more, I want to say retail or shops, and maybe then in the Strings it would be more warehouse or business?
It's
You know, I mean, is that what the idea was?
That's an interesting thought, and that would make sense, except the String is Highway 101.
Yeah. Yeah.
The String is both sides of Highway 101.
Where the pearls go east and west of that.
Right. So where you have a pearl boundary that ends here and a pearl boundary that ends here, and this is Highway 101, that's the String.
Right.
But these be gone.
So on the Strings, I think still 40%, I could put a warehouse on Highway 101. Right, but east of it or west of it, you could not.
Currently, we're saying that it's going to be.
There were so many detours on
That's right. Well, I don't understand what I'm asking.
That's right.
Mini pet park, yeah, I mean, that's.
I'd really like to come back
The back
to page 66, because I guess I'm still a little bit confused. Okay, and I'm not sure because I'm hearing you want the city to have the same standards throughout all 7 miles, from Macoma to Cutler City. This ordinance makes distinctions between D-Lake and Macoma. So do you want those to go away and just have one standard for the whole thing? And do you want Ocean Lake and Taft to look like those?
I think.
And which one do you want it to look like?
I think if we're using the new police building as a design standard, like this is our goal. This is Lincoln City in a police building, in a municipal building, right? And we built it and it looks clean and fresh and nice and it was great. And then we have these buildings, they're inconsistent with that whole overall design. And so for me personally, we're gonna have this new building look a certain way and then require all new businesses to look completely different. I feel like that in itself is a big inconsistency like that. So I disagree with this requiring them to look completely different than the standard of which we're holding ourselves to with our new building.
Okay.
And also, they should be consistent.
Those could be presented as options, not requirements, and be implemented in any of the buildings. Or
What this feels like to me, when I look at this and read it, it almost seems like whoever the consultant was that wrote up these suggestions looked at one or two buildings in each area that happens to be there and said, this is historically what buildings look like here. But what I see when I look at this, being a longtime Lincoln City local, I see Game Over and Comforted. Yeah. The Comforted. And it's almost like someone looked at that building and just went, okay, but to me, the Comforted is not a historic building in D Lake. I can't think of a historic building in D Lake that actually looks like that one. So that's why I was a little confused about the different building shapes and sizes for each.
So let me come back, because this is the part that I'm really struggling with. I understand where Councilor Hoagland's coming from. I just need to make sure I understand that the rest of you have a consensus. You want one look for the whole city.
No.
No, we have, you can have different options.
Different options isn't one look.
But look is the right word. Options without requiring, say, hey, you could do. See what I mean? You don't need to limit that look to Macoma. Somebody can use it in another.
Well, okay, I'm gonna come, okay. The closer we want to say to this is how the city looks, the greater the regulations. Okay? So if you want it to look like one thing, the regulations get tighter. If you want more options, the regulations get looser. And as a result, it doesn't look like one thing. And then the other question is, when you look at the different sections of the city, do you want Cutler City to look like Wacoma? Do you want Taft to look like a string? Do you want Taft to look like Ocean Lake? And again, depending on what you want, the more you want it to create a specific look, the tighter the regulations will be. If you give more options in the looser it is, that's great, but you end up having different looks.
Instead of, maybe what I would like to see was how can we encourage the preservation of existing looks? So historic buildings or historic homes, and saying, can we provide people who own them with incentives to say, maintain it, or at least maintain the facade. You can change anything inside you want, but let's keep the look that Nelscott has of its chimneys and its traditional houses that were built in the 1930s. Because Cannon Beach did that, and it's really attractive to walk through the old part of Cannon Beach and see all of those homes with their gardens and so forth. It's a real tourist attraction. And I think that's, maybe we should be focusing more on preserving and encouraging what currently exists without focusing on what do we want it to look like in the future. Because if you can preserve that, that's what it's going to look like in the future.
And that would make a huge difference in the way this is written, because the way it's written right now, anything that comes in for redevelopment, refurbishment, et cetera, has to meet these new standards, which would not necessarily be preserving the historic look.
So
60%
transparency.
And so let me follow up that with a follow-up question. So if we went down the road that says preserve these older buildings with the look that they have, do you want the new buildings to look like those, or do you want to give them more flexibility?
You want the new buildings to look
No,
like
I
this?
understand the question. I don't have an answer.
But isn't that essentially what we have right now? I mean, if you look at buildings that have been built in the last, pick a number, 20 years, they don't look like the buildings that are in those neighborhoods. Think of banks.
That's true.
None of the banks that are built in this city look like the neighborhoods that they reside in.
That's true.
So that's what we already have.
That is true.
I was here when they started the pearl and string comment, and I would suggest to you that the people who particularly lived in both Taft and Nelscott felt very strongly about the standards that were set and the design elements that were set for that particular community. And to now come and say, we've changed our mind, we want everything in Lincoln City to look exactly the same, I don't think holds to their desires to have it be unique.
There's a very good example in Nelscott on Coast Street, and former Mayor Alice Sims' home was bought, I think, by a couple in Eugene. And they totally gutted the inside of it, but they kept the frame. And really, it looks very attractive. And since they have bought a neighboring home, also an old home, and they have restored that, but they've kept the original look, but it's a new home. And, that's the kind of thing I'm saying we should really be encouraging people to do, because it maintains the look of the old traditional Nelscott.
Cottages.
Cottages, yeah.
Riley?
So,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so how would you, in the current ordinance, which doesn't deal with Nelscott, Taft, or Ocean Lake, all it deals with is general commercial and recreation commercial, how would you like that handled in this current ordinance? Knowing that Ocean Lake, Nelscott, and Taft all have the same requirements.
I was just gonna suggest, maybe it's the age of the building. I think that's where you're getting to the majority of the buildings built during this period of time in this location rather than.
Oh, yeah.
I do have a suggestion based upon what Anne Marie just mentioned. It's been a while since the city has taken a look at the vision documents that they did 10, 12 years ago, that created all of this, and created kind of where we're trying to go with it. That was a very extensive public process that they went through to create these vision documents for the city, and they identify them by the pearls, color city, and so forth. It might be a good time to review those again.
How does that relate to the vision document that was prepared just a couple of years ago?
I think
These ones were much more detailed.
I think the tourism assessment, is that the visioning document you're referring to?
No.
No, the ones that was done before rebuild Ocean Lane.
Yeah.
Oh, the historic, the urban renewal one.
Oh, but wait a minute, I was part of that 06, that packet. And we brought in all of these developers from all over, and those documents are pie in the sky. And not all of them, hardly half of them were ever achieved. All it was done is retain what we have, basically. We hung on to the old buildings and the cottage look. We did not pursue any of those dream ideas. They went nowhere. So
Well-
you can look at them all you want, but they didn't happen.
Well, that's a good time to review it and say, it didn't happen, why? Should it have happened? Or we're glad it didn't happen, and maybe we just throw it away, that part of it away.
Or back to how do you compare that? I know those charrettes, they're really involved, they take days and you actually, they're really fun. But, and then the visioning of what is current and look at those together and how they match up or don't, because we can't throw away all that good work that we don't refer to often.
Riley, are you done, Tam?
I think so.
You know, back to the police building, you know, we chose this building because it had this beach feel, it was more natural, it was representation of the coast, and I look at these buildings and I don't see that, you know, if we're trying to attract businesses, we're not Sisters. I don't feel like we're trying to do a Sisters type redesign of the city. You know, I don't see anywhere like greener buildings, more, you know, like design standards that incorporate, you know, energy efficiency or things like that, and it's just like, look, and I see those buildings coming from a framing background, I see like tons of framing, tons of extra stuff to make it look a certain way that really doesn't have that same purpose, you know, it's just kind of like for looks, and you know, I struggle with why do people come here, why do tourists come here? For the beach, you know, they're not like, no, you know, they'll take a tour of historic, you know, I mean, I don't know how many people look for the old fireplaces in Nelscott, you know what I mean? But I mean, bigger picture, you know, they're coming for the beach, and that does not say beach to me. That does not say, hey, you're at the beach. No, this is 1850s German backcountry.
If I may,
Virginia City, I don't know.
Yeah. One of the first takeaways I got from coming to Lincoln City was where's the maintenance? Why are these buildings not being maintained? Maybe the design standards need to put that into consideration as well as the building materials.
Like it doesn't.
You know, maybe wood and wood siding isn't the best for being on the coast with the winds we have this morning and some other things. So just another seed to put out there for you guys as you think about this is that the materials will make a big difference in how the city is viewed because of maybe the reduced cost of maintenance.
Right. I mean, if you're having tourists who have come here for 30 years, they've come here for 30 years. What worked for them to get them here 30 years ago is not who we're trying to get here now. You know, you have an opportunity to really expand that, to create the newness. I think, yeah, that worked 30 years ago for those people now. Now we're looking at trying to recreate new lifelong visitors and new lifelong tourists, and I don't know if that's the best way to do that. You know, they are more energy conscious. They are more modern. It is different, you know, and so we can all sit here and say, oh, that's what worked. Sure, you know, but looking forward and trying to, you know, push it out. I think, I don't know, anyway, to consider.
Lenny?
Well, I think there are some, if I remember correctly, we're addressing some of the building materials in this design standards there, and that's a good idea, and in fact, that's what precipitated this whole thing was a certain commercial building was built with unusually unaesthetic buildings, cover and right up to the sidewalk. And that's when people finally said, wait a minute, enough is enough.
Motel 6.
I didn't want to say it. But yes, Motel 6 started the whole thing because it's so.
We'll skip down to materials and colors.
Yeah, I know, but that somehow got involved in this discussion, and I thought. And the idea that everything in the city should be absolutely uniform does not, would suggest they all have to have the same materials.
As far as materials go, the material requirements are the same for all the pearls, all the strings, all the high-use streets. There's no differences. And there's no differences really in what's proposed here and what is in the current code. So if there's something that you see here that you would like changed, now would be a good time.
Well, again, I don't see anything in here that has any connection to energy efficiency.
You know, solar, any kind of energy
Yeah.
capture. I mean, if
Green building.
you got to start somewhere. You know what I mean?
Maybe LEED certified could be a level of exemptions or flexibility
Yeah,
within
some sort of
standards.
incentive
You gotta give them
for builders
incentives to make it more expensive to build.
That's solar. Yeah, just get sorry. There's nothing in this in this.
Well, wind capture, I know there's a thing against that. Like,
Why?
Yeah, like really looking at, home, smaller scale wind capture devices and why, what were we just complaining about 4 minutes ago? What was this morning like? How was it?
It was windy.
Oh, it was windy. So let's try to incorporate that. I mean, why couldn't we be a community that really does capture the wind? And if that is incorporated in a design standard to then keep going, then why not? And we could have our own surplus energy.
One of the points that we, sort of an underlying theme we talked about in the planning commission with regards to the development formerly known as the villages, is that it could be an eco-tourism draw. Sure. And everything that's done up there, from activities that are planned to building design and materials to all of that, could be an area that could really showcase that forward thinking, and that in itself would be a draw.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, and we'll go to color, because that is one that has some differences. And the differences are somewhat subjective.
No modifier needed.
As it says there, in the streams or high-use streets, the base colors must be low reflectant shades of any hue, and building trim may feature brighter colors. In the pearls, the neighborhood associations or area business associations may choose color palettes that will take precedent. And if we want to keep that, we would need to figure out how we would process that and have neighborhood associations actually make those decisions, and what type of application form that would go through, or do we want to eliminate that sentence completely? And then it says muted and subtle earth tones or neutral colors are preferred as the primary color. Brighter colors may be acceptable if similar to those on adjacent buildings.
What? Oh, sorry.
Yes, so.
I'm seeing Super Oscar as a dark building with bright trim.
There's so much subjectivity in there that.
It's muted to some.
Yeah, and planning commissioners, anyone who wants to make an adjustment to this is going to come to you, so.
Another thing that I think is important is the lighting. I had some constituents talk about along the highway lighting along the building, but like
Lola, I guess in some other cities, they have lighting so that they feel safer walking. So I don't know if there's I didn't see like on building lighting as well. But the wood thing I think is not probably the best.
Okay, natural wood finish, okay.
I want to point out one thing. When you are using terms such as are encouraged or may, that does not mean have to.
Right.
Okay, so you may encourage something, but if the builder says, nah,
Well, that's
I don't
nice.
want to do that, you can't necessarily turn them down.
Right.
Okay, so when you're using ones that are like that, because you don't want to go so far and say, you have to do this, it means that you may not get what you're encouraging. Okay, it's neither bad nor good, it just is. And I just want to point those kind of things out.
Also, let's talk about the bureaucracy of regulating color. You want to maintain your property and paint it. I saw Coldwell Banker was painting their building this weekend. I don't recall them coming into the counter, but maybe one of our assistant planners helped them. There is color standards. I don't know that they actually came to check on that. The difficulty of regulation of color when it's not a brand new building can be problematic in enforcement.
Right, we were talking about, like, could they repaint it pink? And it was, yeah, they could.
We don't have color palettes that we could.
Yeah, I think you need color palettes.
So,
That purple.
don't have any general.
We just stirred it up a little bit. We just stirred it up a little bit more, Anne Marie.
Stirred
We
up.
didn't pull
I heard
anything out
like
for
that.
you. We just added more. I went like
I
this.
did hear Councilor Coons request maybe some color palettes and actually have a standard color
Okay.
palette that the city would consider, or at least a tone standard.
And that could go with, and that by Pearl or whatever we're trying to do, with the wayfinding signs, kind of tie it all in together maybe as well. I think maybe you said something last time about, yeah, they, could be differentiated that way, but I don't know.
I like the idea of going accent color in each pearl. I think having just a palette and all the way through, like,
These are
I don't know, I
the
mean, all of what this says is just very, very confusing. And I think, what you mentioned about them not coming in,
Yeah, it's a punt.
I had no idea when I painted my building that I would need to go in and talk to someone. I honestly was so sick of that yellow, and I painted my building twice because I didn't like the first color. But it was $40 in 1 gallon of paint. Like, it is so cheap, and for all of our buildings to look the way they do, like, I think last time we mentioned, I think it was you mentioned, if someone's painting, then they should bring it up to whatever
Whatever the code is.
yeah, if they're gonna paint anyway, not just let them repaint the same color. And I like that. I mean, I think paint is one of the easiest ways we can clean up.
But then you have like Sparks, who's got artwork on the outside of it, so then how do you deal with that? That's,
And then I'd just like to remind us, we also have the arts master plan, and murals are in that as don't do it. And so I don't know how we look at both of those.
Don't do it on
I think as a planning commission, we should be very concerned about doing any regulation, just like Anne Marie said, and Lindsay. That's a huge thing. That's picking these colors, regulating these colors, that's staff time, that's forms, that's more liability. As a commissioner, that's how many more hours a week are we gonna be spending doing variances because it's a different shade of brown, or it's not the right kind of green, or just any number of things. You see where I'm going with this. We have bigger fish to fry as commissioners and city councilors, I think, than regulating color. I also agree with the fact that nobody wants everything to look all over the place, and we're trying to go for uniformity, but that's what this is all about. But I think directly trying to regulate colors through palettes or anything like that is going to be way more than unwieldy for us.
And colors change.
Yes. With certain colors.
If here's 300 photos in the old section of Olivia Beach, Phase A. The homes are painted with a certain palette of colors. If you move up into the newer sections, Phase 3 and 4, or Phase 3, you see a different color palette emerging, and that's because tastes have changed in the years of development as.
And that's probably very unwieldy even, or just at least controllable enough there, Steve, because it's one community, a well-managed, smaller community. We're talking about an entire city or a series of 7 cities that we're still trying to incorporate. So that's a lot.
50 years
So
later,
I
we
have
should be well.
I have an idea. When we went to the planning commission training in Bend, he was talking to some people that are in a much smaller community and a historic small town, I think it was Oak Ridge, and if, it was suggested as an option of if your city, if you think you could potentially have enough volunteers, that you could have a historic or design review committee, and that's all those people do. And I think that might make sense for Lincoln City because of all our unique individual situations, so that with city council working on all the things they're working on, and the planning commission working on, we don't all have to sit here and do this. There could be a separate committee of volunteers, like a public art committee or something, that looks at the historical value, and then they can take the time and go through and say, which are the historical buildings? What do we want to encourage to look the same? What colors? They're all minute little things, but then you get the people who, that's what they're interested in, that's what they care about, and they're volunteering and taking the time to review. I mean, I don't know, it just seems like an option. As long as they have
Yeah, see, you're putting one person in for like, and you're giving them that power to say, yeah, that's the source, or no, it's not.
I mean, I hear you that there's bigger fish to fry. This is also a big fish to fry.
Yeah, it is, but the conversation is, can we actually do it?
Yes,
Do we
of
have the
course.
resources to do that?
You could do it, and it could take a while, and it could be a lot of our time.
But
also, how important is it?
But Mr. Mayor, like, is our budget, will it allow for $120,000 in staff time to regulate colors on buildings in Lincoln City? Is the public going to want to do that as taxpayers? When it comes down to it, it sounds like a great idea. But when it comes down to dollars to donuts, actually paying for the resources to do it, maybe there are other options, like Marcy's saying. There are some different ways that we can set it up committee-wise or otherwise to regulate this, but not to be a direct city responsibility for something so broad.
Aren't we part of the heritage cities?
Main Street.
Yeah, Main Street, are we part of that? Doesn't that kind of meld into what we're talking about? As far as historic aspects?
Well, yes, Main Street has 4 foundations. I'm
Yeah.
not sure that we have an actual assigned Main Street group yet, though.
Okay, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Which level? Are we part of some corridor or something, Kathy? Are we a corridor? Are we part of the 101 corridor or something? Scenic?
Well, that's the law that we were talking about with the science.
Yeah, are there any organizational representatives that do that work for these historical, preservations? I know there are in different states and even through the federal government, but, like you're saying, what do we have that other people can give us the guidance on this for?
We aren't designated yet, so
Okay.
we've got a long
We're
way
not
to
there.
go. If I
How-
remember correctly, it's years down the road.
Is it?
perhaps. But I just want to go back to Marcy's idea that there could be a number, I don't know, 5, 4, whatever a good number, people that are really interested in color, interested in presenting the city in a good way. And, I mean, just like other committees suggest things to us, to the planning commission, to the city council.
And do a survey and pick your top 5 colors and see what comes up. I mean, that's something.
Wasn't that part of the, what was it called, the design review?
Design Review Board.
Yeah, well, the design, the outreach that was done before
Correct.
we got here today.
And
Didn't
this is-
we get some information back from that provided something
Yeah,
about
but the,
Colors?
Yes.
when I looked at those, pick which one you like, the little
Yes.
buttons and the pictures would be very different. Here's a downtown area and here are some bright colors and the colors went together, it was great, and then, boring brown. Okay, well, people break. Then they looked at the residential and the colors that they put on the residential were garish. And then brown, oh, well, we'd rather have brown. Well, it depends on what you're presenting as the example to what people are going to choose.
I know, but sometimes you can get kind of a trend where they're kind of looking like, so.
Mr. Mayor, usually when you have something like a design review, most often you see it as a historical review board, but there are groups that are looking at architectural styles, they're looking at colors, things like that. They're generally for a smaller area, 7 miles is a lot of area to cover. There's usually a basis for which they're making their decisions. So for example, if it is a historic district, it is to maintain this historic look. If it's for something else, then it's to maintain that type of thing. And sometimes I feel like I'm a broken record, but again, I just want to point out, the closer and closer you get to wanting to create a specific look, including colors, materials, and all of that kind of stuff, the more regulations you're going to create, and the more bureaucratic time it's going to take to make sure those regulations actually happen, and it also does increase costs.
And which frame of the movie do you pick?
And I think
do you look at
That's a good point.
Lacoma and say historically it has a Pepto-Bismol pink colored building, or historically that building was brown?
That's actually bringing us right back to the original discussion. Do you want to look for the whole 7 miles? If you want it for each individual, the pearls with the strings attaching it, I still think it's a good time for all of us to go back and take a look at the visioning work that has already been done to say, does it still hold?
I think, and Ron's onto something. In my past experiences, the design review boards I've worked with are made up of professionals. They are licensed architects. You have to, the bylaws or the municipal code required one licensed architect, one historic person, and there were specifics on what these individuals had to be professionally trained in to be able to sit on that board. I see that could potentially cause some struggles with the makeup of our community. But also the design review board was an optional thing for builders and developers. They could prescriptively meet the standards of the design review ordinance. If they didn't want to prescriptively meet and just follow what the code says, and they wanted some, it's not a variance, but a deviation from the standards, they would then go to the board and kind of negotiate the ability to make those changes. It is true, it increases costs upwards to like 25 to 30% of the cost of a development once you get in front of these professionals that value their community and don't care how much it costs for you to get into it. And so there is that negative, and if Lincoln City doesn't have the market to be able to pull those high value developers, you could ultimately be hindering some future growth and some future minor projects that you might want to see, even though they don't fit the perfection of your 30-year vision. So take heed in that consideration.
And so what I'm hearing, and I need you guys to tell me if I'm right or wrong, because this will determine how the staff goes forward. What I'm hearing is that you do desire a greater control of what the look is going to be, which means you do desire greater regulations that are in this ordinance now. And that could be up to and including some type of a review board. Am I right in my summarization of what I'm hearing from you, or am I off?
You're off, in my opinion.
Yeah, is that really, I don't, yeah.
You're saying greater control because we want it more uniform.
If you want a building if you want a town that's all blue, it's all navy blue, then you're going to write a regulation that says you can only use navy blue paint. I mean, that's an extreme, it's a silly one. Sure. But the point is that the more control you want, the greater the regulations are going to be. And that's what I've been hearing, but now Miles tells me that I'm off on that. So I'm trying to get a sense of where we go with this whole discussion.
I think part of it was have a way in which buildings can restore and not have to update to the current standards. If they renovate more than 50% of their value, then they would be required to go up, right? So that's keeping the historic look Yes, they can gut the inside. Yes, they can do whatever they want inside, but they keep it looking how it was, number one. And then I think the other thing was have a more uniformed look across the city. Whatever that is, I'm not sure.
Although, when I was
New construction.
saying that, I was thinking of the architectural structure, not the color.
Correct. Correct. I think the color thing is maybe not quite yet.
I would sort of leave that if I were in charge, because there is a community standard when it comes to color, and we all know when somebody paints something that is out of bounds. It's talked about.
Sure. And that's all that it is. It's not, we don't go to Bob's and say, hey, guess what, you have to repaint it. We didn't do that. It's like, and that's Bob's and that's cool, whatever, and that's fine. Do we want every building to be pink? Probably not. But it's been fine so far, and it is an octopus thing, like, oh, there's a pink building. I mean, really, if we're gonna embrace this thing, let's use it as much as possible. But, and that's what I think is important, is to like the Sims building, they gutted it, they did everything, and then it still looked the same, and I think that's important.
It looks better than it looked before.
Right.
But it was in the traditional, what it looked like.
Then we gotta define what's historical.
As it's written, it's not bad. It's pretty broad. It's a suggestion for colors and a few colors and things like that. You can leave it as it is. You can make a commission to put more suggestions out, but you're not forcing people, like you're saying, to repaint their building or whatever. And I think
We're not doing that.
Exactly.
Right.
And let me clarify that the way it is written right now is, there is a prescriptive path. And you can choose to go down that prescriptive path, and if you meet all of those, great. Staff reviews it, you meet them all, check, you're approved. If you would, if you would like to request adjustments or modifications to any of the shalls or musts, then it's going to come to Planning Commission.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm fine with that as it is, because the shalls and musts aren't in there on the broader things like the colors.
Anything that's a main,
you
don't have to do.
The code would also need to change in its format a little bit, so that there is still a standard that the board must use to make sure that what they're proposing may not prescriptively meet, but can still meet the intent of color or modulation or roof design.
Yeah.
And there would still need to be some benchmarks for the board to be able to say, no, this just doesn't comply, we cannot approve.
Yeah, we're not going to allow a tin-sided building in a zone.
And I believe those are in there now with the guiding principles.
Right.
The standards and the intent. Yeah. I think we have the benchmarks. So it's more a matter of, when it comes down to color, it's more a matter of what do you consider prescriptive and what do you consider as when it should be kicked to the next level.
What I'm concerned about is that there is one standard of design for the entire 7.5 mile city, rather than different ones for different sections of the city, boroughs and the other part.
So what are you saying, Miles? Because that's the way it is now, pretty much.
And
You don't like that?
I think we should think about using for future development, having it all one building code, one design code.
I think that's what was talked about earlier,
Yeah.
and that seemed to be the consensus, to make sure the strings came up to the borough.
Exactly.
So in light of that then, that takes us back to a few of the differences. We skipped 2 materials and color from ground floor transparency. And so I wanted to go back to a few of those differences just to make sure that that is what you're wanting to see everywhere. And building entrances, I lost my thing.
You need to log behind.
Building entrances is an important one. Oh.
Yeah. I mean, it's been going on for all the equipment shutting down. Lights are next.
The meeting's saying, that's it.
When the temperature goes up and you get really grumpy, you know it's time to finish.
Well, while I will start to talk while that's coming on, but the entrances are important because the pearls require a significant excess of entrances than is required in the strings. Entrances, okay. So in the Pearl, the minimum number of entrances that are connected to the street, which would be the sidewalk, in the Pearl, you need to have one entrance plus at least one additional entrance for every 40 feet of building street frontage. If you can't meet that because of the way the building is designed or how it functions on the inside, then you need to have an average of at least one entrance for every 90 feet. In the strings, you're only required one entrance. And that's a pretty big difference when you're talking one entrance versus one entrance every 40 feet. And I will give you a real life example, the Ocean Lake Veterinary Clinic. They have, that's going in. So they have two street frontages in their new building, one on 101 and one on 32nd. And so and they're in a Pearl. So with that, they had to ask for an adjustment because that meant that their building wall against 32nd, or I think it's 32nd, needed to have an entrance every 40 feet, and their building wall against Highway 101 needed to have an entrance every 40 feet, which as a veterinary clinic, they could not do because they have exam rooms, they have a surgery room, and the internal functioning of the building and the grades, the difference in grade between 101 and where the building is, they just couldn't do that at all. So they could do the one entrance, but they couldn't do one every 40 feet. They couldn't even do the one average of every 90 feet. So they did a corner plaza steel trellis thing as a mitigation for that. But I just point that out as consideration of when you're looking at this, do you want one entrance? Do you want one every 40 feet? Do you want one an average of every 90 feet? Or do you want something completely different?
How does fire code
Yeah, is
play
this a
into
safety?
this? I would think, one every 90 feet would that be up to fire code? Is that safe? Just to have that?
There's a certain number of, and that depends upon the building occupancy classification and also the type of construction, which determines the number of egress and the distance between them. So it's very, very case by case specific.
Anne Marie, I guess it sounds like we have a workaround in place.
Mm-hmm. We
So,
do.
in the Pearl.
Yep.
So why would you not, as we said earlier, this is a good example, move to the Pearl, there's a workaround, if it's in the spring, it doesn't matter, but if.
So,
yeah.
I
continue that
guess,
forward.
as long as
Okay.
there's a workaround, and.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Glad to hear.
And that's why you're the mayor.
Building
That's why.
articulation. In the Pearls, in the Pearls and the high-use streets, your maximum individual wall plane size is 800 square feet, and on the string, it's 1,600 square feet. So again, you're comfortable with moving all of that to the 800, okay? Pedestrian shelters.
What is a pedestrian shelter? I don't understand.
It's basically like a canopy or an awning or a cover over the entrance And so in the pearls, that needs to extend 75% of the building frontage length. And in the strings, it's just at the entrance. And there are dimensions for that. It has to be at least, I believe, 5 feet wide and 5 feet deep.
And the purpose for that is what?
Pedestrian shelter, protection from the rain.
Yeah, during the feedback of the summer last year, the notes from a lot of the public were to provide weather protection for those that are visiting Lincoln City outside of the, what's it called, shoulder season and summer season. So there was a strong desire to have that. I'm not sure if it takes away some of the value of what the building could look like. You know, awnings tend to hide ugly, well, I think.
Tell us what you really think. There's something.
When you're leaving.
She's not running again.
There's an ability, you know, it depends on the design of the awning. You can have some really nice steel structure ones, or you could have some temporary looking fabric.
And you can have a
PVC
lot of
ones.
inconsistency along the street.
Well,
But it wasn't felt necessary to provide that along the strings.
I'm betting you're having
just at the
parking
entrance.
closer on the string. I mean, again, for me, it's that concept that string is rural, and gee, you slam your parking up close to the
But
building, but the
not in
rural.
the future.
Bingo, and that's my fear, that we end up with
We don't have much strings anymore.
Yeah.
stuff, you know,
Yeah.
that get, you know, it should be as if it's gonna grow.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And again, the interesting thing to remember is that the string is Highway 101,
Right.
which is where hopefully people would be parking somewhere
Parking
and
and
walking.
walking.
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of want it to be the same.
Okay.
Yeah,
One thing that
Steve
we
and I
did
agree
talk
about
about wanting, with the sign code, wanting to see more blade signs. And that is one thing, is you're not gonna be able, if you've got an awning going all the way across the buildings, and we require 75% of the frontage to have an awning, you're not gonna be able to put that blade sign somewhere. You're gonna end up with the flat signs or the expensive engineering ones they have to put on top of, unless the new development that is, but if we wanna see the blade signs, but we also want 75% coverage, I don't see how the two can really go hand in hand.
Well, if you go look, okay, at the outlet center, because they are covered.
Yeah.
And then the blade sign
And then
goes
there's blade
underneath. You can bring them up and still cover that.
So that the hanging from the awning signs,
Right.
those work really well, and those can be seen also, so that's.
There's, when you go into a lot of downtowns, they have the awning, and it'll be flat, and then the sign will be hanging from the awning, rather, and they're visible.
Right.
Well, isn't this whole concept the one kind of weather related, where somebody was thinking ahead that it might rain in Lincoln City? And for convenience, again, to the businesses or storefronts, pedestrians would rather not get rained on. So
Right.
I guess isn't that really the question is, do you give a rip?
That is the question.
Again, why you're mayor, you know? Chosen
Word
first.
choice.
But I guess
Which
that
takes me back to, it begs the question of why along the string is just at the entrance, when the string
Is 101.
It's connecting.
101.
Yeah, yeah.
Puzzling. I know I'm not supposed to have an opinion.
Yeah.
I just thought that was puzzling.
We always like to hear what's said.
Well, you run the risk too of demanding your builders to add cost for what purpose? It's bothering me, you know, if you're.
to keep customers out of the weather.
I wonder if there's a
If
use.
it's a place that's just parking in front of the building.
But we're not allowing that anymore, type of thing. If in essence your design standards are the same, you wouldn't have, you know, that massive parking.
Yeah, there should be no parking.
If I can think about, let's take an example of something that we really have that is useful within the city. So What's that?
Robies, I mean, they.
Robies is a retail use, so that makes sense to me, but I'm thinking like the chainsaw repair guy, he's in a string. Does he really need to have an awning for someone to come in, you know, for the full length of his building if he redevelops it? When it's not a retail trying to draw people in regularly, but more of a service industry that you know you're going to with you. Hopefully, if you're carrying your chainsaw, you're going to the chainsaw repair guy. What's that?
What happens when the use changes, that building changes?
Correct. So I guess if you're wanting to see retail fill up along 101, then that would make sense. That all buildings would have awnings. But I do think there is a component of use to this that should be considered.
If you have a hotel and 75% of the building's frontage needs an awning, that doesn't quite make sense. A hotel, you really only need the covering where you're going in to check, like every single hotel is designed. You're not gonna have an awning across 75% of the building frontage. So, yeah, I think use makes a big difference and the intent of it.
And again, if we leave it at the 75%, as the mayor reminded us, they can request an adjustment. If for some reason they need to modify it and show why they need to modify it and what they're going to provide instead for pedestrian shelter. But if we lower it, then we don't get it.
Right.
So if we leave it at the 75% and someone can't do it for whatever reason, they can request that modification. But if we lower it, then we're stuck with whatever we lower it to.
And how known is it that like, oh, you see all this? No, you don't have to worry about all this. You can change whatever you want. Do developers know that any of these things, they can be like, no, I can't do that? Or do they just look at it and be like, I can't do that, so I won't?
So it's not quite that easy. But in my past experience on the private sector, I've worked with lots of developers, and it is very standard in all codes everywhere to have a prescriptive path and a path where you can request an adjustment or a modification and go before the planning commission or the development review board or whomever that jurisdiction has designated as your review. And so developers are accustomed. They're accustomed to that and they're familiar with it. And actually they like that because it gives them two choices. They can say they can come in and they can look at the code and they can say, okay, this is what we have to do. If we can't do this, then we've got to go through the process of requesting modifications. But if they don't want to take the time to go through that process, boom, they have a route that they can just get started on.
And our customer service at the counter is really well for the local guys that aren't developers but own a business, own property, and want to do something. We're very upfront about the options to be able to provide the full menu for them to look through. That's
Yeah, no private conversation. Is that what I heard earlier?
Another benefit of the mayor. Well, actually, what I was doing was, trying to say, do we have to sit for another hour? My vote was to call it for the morning, because it's good conversation, but I think we're there.
We made a lot of progress.
Yes,
And
I think we did.
said she's got enough to go to the next step anyway, so.
You like this stone soup we're making?
So let me give the podium to Ron and close this out.
So just some parting information of things that we did not discuss and things that you don't know about that will help that's actually was a big part of our discussions. The city currently has a request for proposal out now to hire services for the design of our entrance signs. Ed and I have talked about expanding that to include wayfinding signs as well. Based on our discussion, we will definitely do it. We will definitely expand that. So that's going to go forward. And then the other part of it is when we're talking about wayfinding signs, we're talking about budget. And the city council recently extended the time on the feather banners until April while we try to finish this up. What I'd really like to do is we're talking about both of these is try to tie a little bit of that into the budget season, a little bit of that into the wayfinding signs, so that as we're talking with the businesses, we have a package to discuss with them and not just a piecemeal type of a thing, which is what you guys seem to be interested in. So this may take us a little bit of time to get back to you, but I think what we'll finally have is a more complete package than we have today.
That's great.
Since we're on our sign thing, did we lose our north side right to put a sign there since it's been so long and it's deteriorated?
I don't think we have lost our right to put it there, but it's not necessarily the best place to put it.
Yeah.
So we're looking at that as well.
Okay.
So, thank you, but I guess I would remind you all that as you're talking to citizens and businesses, that if it was simple, we would have done it a long time ago. And you can share with them the number of times you've sat around these tables, talking and trying to, get consensus, and trying to please everybody. And it's a tough job. So, thank you. If you come up with the magic bullet, let me know. You can insert it quickly.
To be helpful, if we get copies of our homework ahead of time, it's helpful to read through it and you kind of are more familiar with it. That'd be good.
And would it be possible for I don't know what format those older visioning documents are in. Are they electronic?
They're both. We have them print form and we have electronic.
Can they be made available electronically?
I will send you a link
I
to
believe
all of
they're on-
those so you can just go.
That'd be great.
Yeah, they're on the website.
If you go to Urban Renewal.
We'll send you an email with the link so you don't have to go searching for it. You click the button, it's there.
Very helpful.
See how nice it is?
Thank you. And all everybody for their service. Going by.
Great.